Everything is too easy after maxing my talents. Chapter 751, Double Glow Gold Talent, Final Trial, _1. Name, Li Yueming, Permanent Reincarnator. Reincarnation Number, 7001611. Mark of Reincarnation Level, LV4, 20500/30,000. Reincarnation Points Balance, 2634105. Origin Power, 100 times Talent Enhancement. Fixed Talents, Infinite Deduction, Gold, Perfect Genetic Body, Shiny Gold. Bound Unique Titles, God of Martial Arts, Red, Starlight Preacher, Red, Heart Spirit Reader, Red, Star Moon Emperor, Gold. Fixed Talent, 3. Fixed Number of Talents, 6. Additional Reincarnations, 8. Due to the violent attack of unknown external energy, the energy of the reincarnation mark has been severely depleted. This is the final assessment of us. The reincarnation mark will forcefully recruit the reincarnators selected by the target in advance. This reincarnation will be extremely dangerous, and the reincarnation mark may not be able to protect the reincarnator's safety. Reincarnator, please take care of yourself. Once again, this assessment was opened early due to the serious exhaustion of the reincarnation mark's energy. It is accidental and mandatory. The reincarnation mark cannot guarantee safety. If the reincarnator feels that he is not ready to go, there is only one chance to forcefully leave the reincarnation mark. Reincarnator, please consider carefully. The explanation has ended. Reincarnators, please confirm whether to start the assessment. Time always slipped through his fingers unknowingly, and 3 months passed quietly. This morning, the crisp sound of the reincarnation mark appeared in Li Yueming's mind. After reading it from beginning to end and understanding the meaning of the mark of rebirth, the expression on Li Yueming's face paused for a moment. He slowly opened his eyes and sighed. 3 months ago, when the reincarnation mark had just released the mandatory recruitment mission information, he had already felt that this reincarnation was not simple. Now, it seemed that his guess was very accurate. This reincarnation was indeed different from the previous ones. The mission had not even begun, but the reincarnation mark was already giving him a heads up. He did not know how high the level of the world he was going to was. Even the reincarnation mark took the initiative to express that it could not protect his life. In addition, he did not know what exactly caused this. Decades ago, the reincarnation shield began to show signs of a shortage of energy. It was also because of this that the so-called invasion of dark energy had occurred. All kinds of monsters had infiltrated the reincarnation world from an unpredictable space and time, seriously threatening the safety of reincarnators and ordinary people. This matter was already enough for many reincarnators to suffer. After all, the main material world was the foundation for reincarnators to transcend the outside world. Without the protection of the mark of rebirth, the entire prime material plane would be corroded by endless chaos. No reincarnator could protect themselves in such a calamity. Now, the chain reaction caused by the lack of energy in the mark of reincarnation was no longer just the collapse of the protective shield of the prime material plane. It was reflected in many aspects. Logically speaking, under normal circumstances, all the logic of the reincarnation mark should be based on Li Yueming. After all, this thing was tailor-made for Li Yueming from a certain point of view. The purpose was to let Li Yueming improve as soon as possible and store power for the upcoming cosmic war. Therefore, the reincarnation mark should be the most concerned about Li Yueming's personal safety. But now, the reincarnation mark took the initiative to let Li Yueming try to take the risk. If he wasn't wrong, this should be a problem in one of the parts of the plan to change the future from the past, which led to the extreme situation before him. Just as the 10 city lords had said, the exhaustion of the reincarnation mark's energy was only one of the manifestations of the truth. As for what exactly went wrong, the existence behind the reincarnation mark of 0 did not indicate it. Even Li Yueming had no idea for the time being. After roughly understanding the cause and effect of the game, as well as some other related theories, Li Yueming couldn't help but reveal a bitter smile and said, "How cunning! He threw this difficult problem to me to make a choice. Wasn't the last US assessment dangerous enough?" However, when he entered the world, the reincarnation mark did not remind him at all. It was only after Li Yueming found some clues that the reincarnation mark stammered out to warn him. But now, before Li Yueming even entered the reincarnation world, the reincarnation mark jumped out to remind him that it was full of danger. What did this mean? This meant that the world where Li Yueming's final assessment was located was likely to have many existences that exceeded conventional understanding. Once Li Yueming stepped into it, he would be in danger of being destroyed from the root. To put it in simpler terms, if anything happened, Li Yueming would not be able to return to the main material world through the reincarnation mark and would really die. The danger involved could be seen from this. Right now, although the reincarnation mark said that it was a forced entry, it gave Li Yueming a chance to refuse. In other words, he had placed the chance to decide whether he would live or die in his own hands. Although this inexplicable respect was surprisingly good, it was definitely a difficult choice for Li Yueming. Of course, it wasn't that he was timid, but the more he understood, the heavier the burden on his shoulders became. Chapter 752, Double Glow Gold Talent, Final Trial, _2. Going or not going was just a decision he could make with a single thought, but there was too much hidden behind this thought, and it also contained too much. The consequences might even engulf the entire universe. Therefore, he needed to consider it carefully. If he chose to protect himself now, his life might be safe. But what would happen in the future? If nothing unexpected happened, they would still be unable to escape the fate of the Zergs sweeping across the world. Even if he lived for a while now, he would not end up well in the end. Since that was the case, there were no two paths in front of him. With his personality, rather than struggling to survive and avoid the edge of the battle, it was better to take a risk in the fire. Perhaps he could still kill a possible path out of the impossible. After thinking about the cause and effect, Li Yueming no longer hesitated. "Let's start the assessment." Hearing his answer, the reincarnation mark paused for a moment before flashing with a blue light. Ding! Activating reincarnation tunnel. World loaded. World loading successful. Planet serial number, ***. Planet level, LV10, extremely dangerous. The reincarnator is in the midst of a mystery in the womb. After the initial introduction, you can enter the reincarnation world. Third epoch, end of epoch. Fourth epoch, beginning of epoch. The Zerg living at the edge of the universe invaded the central universe on a large scale. The major life races in the central universe could not resist the invasion of the Zerg tide and were defeated. One after another, the starry sky was devoured by the endless insect tide, turning into a hotbed for the insect race to nurture the next generation. In the middle of the fourth era, the major races in the central universe, who felt the danger of extinction, finally let go of their prejudices and vigilance against each other. They formed an alliance called the Order Alliance, and began a struggle against the chaotic and disorderly bugs that lasted for several eras. During this period of time, countless supreme experts shed blood in the war, countless dynasties that were once prosperous were destroyed, and endless star fields were shattered one after another. This is an inconspicuous human planet in the Alliance of Order. In the current universe environment where everyone is on tenterhooks, the only thing that the people should be glad about is that they are at the No. 26 defense line of the Third Universe's Order camp and not at the front line of the battle against the Zergs. However, even though this is just an ordinary planet in the billions of starfields, the dark clouds of war that swept across the entire universe still shrouded over the heads of every galactic citizen. Defend the planet and fight against the insectoids. This is the main theme recognized by 90% of the races in the entire central universe. Initial background introduction completed. Randomly drawing talent. Congratulations on obtaining talent, Great Mechanic Sage, Red. Great Sage of Machinery, Red. You are born with an unparalleled affinity for machinery. Damage dealt by mechanical weapons increased by 300%, efficiency in developing and manufacturing machinery increased by 500%, intelligence increased by 500%. The 100-fold increase in the origin energy talent has been triggered. The effects of all your talents will be increased by 100 times. Your talent Great Sage of Machinery has been enhanced by 100 times by the origin energy and has been transformed into the green talent Machinery God. Machinery God, Shiny Gold. You are a natural-born mechanical god. Damage of mechanical weapons increased by 3000%, efficiency of research and development and manufacturing increased by 5000%, intelligence increased by 5000%. The only special effect of the Shiny Gold talent, Machinery God. You can control all the mechanical components around you to assemble a huge mechanical deity. The attributes of the mechanical deity are 10 times that of your own attributes. Originally, Li Yueming was still a little nervous when he saw the background introduction of the world. According to the information he had obtained from Han Bohan, his reincarnation this time did not seem to be like the previous reincarnations where he entered an isolated information island world. Instead, he had officially stepped onto the grand stage of the Stellaris universe. This also meant that this time, his growth would completely break away from the limitations of the world itself and reach the peak that the entire universe could tolerate. Thinking of the risks and opportunities involved, even Li Yueming couldn't help but shudder. It was also because of this that the world level, which had been dawdling all this time, had soared from level 5 under normal circumstances to level 10. In the face of such a universe-level world, level 10 was probably only the upper limit of the reincarnation world that could be set by the reincarnation mark. It was not that the universe-level world really only had a level 10 danger level. Fortunately, his luck was heaven-defying this time. He actually drew a red talent at once. After 100-fold amplification, it evolved into an invincible shiny gold talent. Otherwise, with just 2 golden talents, Li Yueming really couldn't guarantee that he could make a name for himself in this world where big shots were everywhere. Of course, according to the information that Han Bufan had revealed, this so-called shiny gold talent should not be fabricated by the reincarnation mark. Instead, it was a talent that he would obtain in the future. The reincarnation mark only gave him what he should have obtained in advance in a special form. But here came the problem. He was a reincarnator who specialized in personal strength. Would he really be able to use a talent from the mechanic class? Just as Li Yueming was doubting his life, the speed of refreshing information in the reincarnation mark did not slow down at all. Detected that you have advanced administrator authority. Chapter 753, Double Glow Gold Talent, Final Trial, _3. This reincarnation has an additional talent lottery chance and a fixed talent chance. The second talent is being drawn. Talent extraction successful. Congratulations on obtaining talent, Martial Deo Master, Red. Martial Deo Master, you are a well-deserved top-notch master in the field of personal power. Whether it was physical techniques or martial arts, whether it was hot weapons or cold weapons, you could use your unique understanding of personal strength to maximize its effects. All attributes increased by 500%, personal strength cultivation technique and secret manual cultivation efficiency increased by 500%, personal martial damage increased by 1000%. The 100-fold increase in the origin energy talent has been triggered. The effects of all your talents will be increased by 100 times. Your talent Eminent Master has been transformed into the green talent All-Rounded Martial Saint after being amplified by 100 times the original power. Omnipotent Martial Saint, Shiny Gold. Your attainments in martial arts can be said to be omniscient and omnipotent. All the power that can be used will be used by you and become the source of your personal power. All attributes increased by 5000%. Personal strength cultivation technique and secret manual cultivation efficiency increased by 5000%, personal martial damage increased by 50,000%. The rules of this reincarnation world are level 10. Reincarnators can bring 5 talents into the reincarnation world. Will you bind talents, machinery god, shiny gold, almighty martial saint, shiny gold, perfect genetic body, shiny gold, infinite deduction, gold. The series of messages released by the reincarnation mark stunned Li Yueming. Good heavens, the reincarnation mark actually gave him 2 more brilliant gold talents? It seemed that this world was really dangerous. Level 10 worlds were supposed to have 5 talents. If his guess was correct, Li Yueming should have obtained 5 brilliant gold talents in the final assessment if he followed the guidance of the reincarnation world and took it step by step. This was not difficult to understand. After all, the reincarnation mark itself was the path that Li Ziyu and the others had specially paved for Li Yueming. From the moment it was created, the program should have been set up. The reincarnation mark would execute the established procedures step by step until a certain time was ripe and the approach point set by Li Ziyu and the others was triggered. Only then would this so-called ultimate assessment begin. However, there was a problem with the reincarnation mark. The direct result was that Li Yueming's original 5 talents were not all maxed out. One of them was even empty. Thinking of this, Li Yueming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Therefore, did Li Ziyu and the others think that so many shiny gold level talents could not help him develop rapidly and complete a certain goal they wanted to achieve? However, when he thought of the existence he might face, the smile on Li Yueming's face faded. This kind of luxurious talent configuration was enough to dominate the world in any world. However, Li Yueming was facing the Zerg race, which was known as the Cosmic Calamity. Who knew how terrifying the other party was? The more top-notch talent, the better. He threw away all kinds of messy thoughts in his mind. Li Yueming took 2 deep breaths and focused his thoughts again. Out of the 4 talents, 3 of them were shining gold grade. The infinite deduction talent had become the lowest grade talent. However, this talent was still unique to Li Yueming. Now, it was time for this talent to take effect. It was just that he did not know if this talent could still be accurate in describing the unknown things in the entire universe. Chapter 754, An Unattainable Dream, Interstellar Martial Arts, _1. According to the general process of entering the world, Li Yueming silently activated the infinite deduction talent. The mystery of this world's fetus has been solved. Life is being deduced. 18 years old, you woke up in the hospital and found out that you are a student of Montenegro City's aristocratic martial arts school. When you reach adulthood at the age of 18, you will graduate from the martial arts school and pass the strict examination to enter the military academy. The graduation date is approaching, but you feel that you don't have enough talent and strength to pass the military academy's assessment. In order to stand out and become a respected Black Star Troop soldier, you began to train hard before the official assessment. This is to pray to the God of Stars to give you a hint of care due to your pious faith. However, I don't know if it's because your thoughts are still not pious enough or because the star field you're in is too remote, but the God of Stars guardian did not respond to your expectations. A month before the assessment officially began, you even fainted in the training ground due to physical and mental exhaustion. As expected, you missed the assessment of the military academy and lost the opportunity to join the interstellar army. 19 years old, you are very dispirited since you did not become a soldier of the interstellar army. Especially after seeing that many of your classmates have successfully passed the assessment and left this remote small planet, you feel an unprecedented unwillingness. 20 years old, after drinking for a whole year, you spent all the pension your parents left you after their death and lost your main source of income. You had no choice but to go out and look for a job. Planet sequence 7 to 20,003 is as remote as ever. Montenegro City can only be considered a tiny speck of dust in the vast universe, but even so, even the dust like Montenegro City still looks incomparably majestic in front of you. You took your resume and searched around Montenegro City. Although you're not considered a powerful physical martial artist, you're quite familiar with all kinds of martial arts moves and techniques because you've been cultivating in an aristocratic martial arts school since you were young. In the end, you found a job as a private dojo instructor and began your career of teaching martial arts. 25 years old, after working day after day over the years, you realize that the fire in your heart seems to have been extinguished at some point. You no longer yearned for the boundless universe, nor did you hate the unknown and terrifying Zerg monsters. You even lost the determination to go to the battlefield where your parents died to pay homage to them. You know that this is because you have become an adult unknowingly. You have lost your curiosity, your courage to disregard everything, and the youthful spirit that surged in your chest. You have become mediocre and boring, like a walking dead machine. 32 years old, you have completely forgotten your childhood dream. Even if you occasionally think about it, you will only treat it as a joke. While working in Montenegro City, you took a fancy to a pretty good girl and married her. She gave birth to a lively and cute child. Although your current life is not considered rich, it is peaceful and happy. You seem to be very satisfied with everything, but occasionally, when you look at the stars, you feel a little sad and nostalgic. If you had seized the opportunity to become a member of the Interstellar Army, would you have taken a different path? Of course, you're just thinking about it. Now, everything doesn't seem too bad. 35 years old, you are already a middle-aged man, and your life has gradually returned to a pool of stagnant water. There are not many waves. However, just when you thought that your life was going to end like this, the Order Legion's interstellar warships that covered the sky suddenly entered the star field around Planet 7 to 20,003 and stationed themselves there. After asking around, you found out that the number of Zergs on the front line has increased again. This army is coming from the Central Universe region and is preparing to go to the first front line to support the Interstellar Alliance army. Although no one said it out loud, you could still feel the seriousness of the situation from their words. The Zerg race is too huge, so much so that even such a vast universe combined is still not their match. You are worried about this, but that is an ultimate problem that even universe supreme beings can't solve. You, an ordinary person, naturally can't do anything about it. In the vast tide of the times, you and your planet are nothing more than a tiny speck of dust. It is worth mentioning that during the period when the interstellar warship stopped near the star field, the students who cultivated martial arts in the Martial Arts Academy like you also took this opportunity to return. Their return home was received with a grand reception by the head of Planet 7 to 20,003. It was said that in order to welcome their arrival, the entire planet's gunships fired hundreds of fireworks in a row that day. Their arrival brought unprecedented vitality to this unremarkable planet. You are also among the welcoming crowd. From afar, you can see those glamorous classmates walking past. You only feel that everything is familiar and unfamiliar. They were still as young and confident as they were decades ago. They looked around with a refreshing aura. Countless young men and women screamed in shock among the welcoming crowd. But you've been under the pressure of life and family all these years. Your figure has long gone out of shape. You even have a beer belly. Chapter 755, An Unattainable Dream, Interstellar Martial Arts, _2. This glory should belong to me too, you thought, but you couldn't say a word. Your 15-year-old child looked at the members of the Black Star Army who were in the limelight not far away. His face was filled with longing as he told you that he also wanted to become a glorious Black Star Army soldier and destroy all those damn Zergs. When you came back to your senses, you did not agree with his ideals. You even reprimanded him loudly. This is the first time you and he have had such a fierce argument. You felt that the Interstellar Army was too dangerous and hoped that he could live a peaceful life, but he told you that you didn't understand the youth's ideals at all. You also didn't know the vastness of the universe. You were just a pitiful loser. You look at him, at the flesh of your heart that you have raised with all your heart and soul. For the first time, you feel extremely ridiculous. But in the end, even though your face was pale and your lips were trembling, you still didn't say anything. You just sighed slightly and turned around to leave the welcoming ceremony alone. 38 years old, the interstellar army has been on the road for many years after a short period of rest, and the planet you are on has finally returned to the right track. It seems that nothing has happened in the past few years, but a lot has happened. More and more young people on planet 7 to 20,003 want to become a soldier in the Black Star Army. Even the business of your own small dojo is booming. Each and every one of them is filled with hope and ambition, and they are constantly challenging the military academy's assessment. Regarding this, you are somewhat nostalgic and emotional. Since you're destined not to realize your dreams, then pour your dreams on these children. Think about it this way. 40 years old, through these years of education, you have become a famous martial arts instructor in Montenegro City. There are countless young people who want to ask you for special training every day. You are always very tolerant of them and have also helped many poor students from poor families. A middle-aged person should have gradually lost hope for life, but you have found the value of your existence in this group of energetic young people. Even the martial arts bottleneck that has been stagnant for many years in your body shows signs of loosening. You thought that everything would be peaceful until that day, the endless bug horde swarmed in from the other side of the star field. The warships that were urgently mobilized for defense were destroyed before they could fully deploy. The entire defense line No. 26 of the Third Universe was in chaos. In the public channel broadcast, you heard words like Zergs and surprise attack. You also saw batches after batches of fully armed interstellar warriors rushing to the battlefield on the television station's Star Domain channel. But those soldiers who were once as dazzling as the morning sun, the soldiers of the galactic army that you had always dreamed of becoming, shattered like paper under the endless Zerg tide. Other than blood and fire, everything on the battlefield was so blurry. This is your first time witnessing the war between the Alliance of Order and the Zergs, and also your first time coming into contact with the terrifying power that could easily destroy the world. You suddenly understand why you didn't get into the military academy back then. It's because the opponents you faced weren't existences that could be fought with just numbers. Instead, you needed incomparably powerful elites. Defense lines were breached one after another, and battleships were destroyed one after another. The 34,557 trillion people of the 382 planets on the 26th defense line witnessed everything together, but they could only watch everything with their eyes wide open. 41 years old, the planet you are on has been devoured by an incomparably huge Zerg Queen Mother. You are dead. The deduction this time was exceptionally long, and the content was rather trivial. Li Yueming was not used to it. He had thought that he would die as quickly in this life as he had in his previous lives. He did not expect that he would live for more than 40 years, which was a rare occurrence. He should be considered the one with the longest lifespan among the natives he had possessed. Even though this longevity came at the price of mediocre. But it still seems to be quite difficult. After all, there were still many ordinary people in this world. How could there be so many geniuses? He shook his head. Li Yueming secretly memorized the contents of the infinite deduction. Although most of them were just the ordinary life of a middle-aged man, there were still a few pieces of information that were very important, such as martial arts, military assessment, and when I was 40, the Zerg attacked, and so on. After engraving all the useful information in his mind, he was shocked. Without hesitation, Li Yueming chose to enter the reincarnation world. 7 to 20,003 planet, Montenegro City Public Hospital. Li Yueming slowly opened his eyes and scanned his surroundings. The pale sheets, the slightly crowded metal bed, and the lingering smell of disinfectant. This should be the hospital where he woke up during the deduction. Just as Li Yueming was scanning his surroundings to confirm his situation, some information that belonged to his previous owner also surged into his mind along with his messy thoughts. This was the first time that Li Yueming had transmigrated into an adult's body without experiencing the mystery of the womb. Therefore, the feeling of information surging into his mind was very novel to him. The original owner of this body was also called Li Yueming. His parents had died on a distant interstellar battlefield. Because the Zerg had the characteristic of devouring corpses, they did not even leave a skeleton behind, only a cenotaph. The Alliance of Law and Order gave Li Yueming a rather generous pension. It was also because of this pension and a little bit of talent that Li Yueming was able to attend a noble martial arts school and learn the third cultivation plan for personal mighty power warriors promoted by the Alliance of Law in the Third Cosmos. Under normal circumstances, ordinary people could only attend public martial arts schools to learn the second reversion of the cultivation plan for personal magnificent power warriors. Only students with rich family backgrounds and talent could enter elite schools to learn the third cultivation plan, which was more efficient and powerful. Of course, it wasn't that the Alliance of Law and Order was being selfish and treating nobles and civilians differently. It was just that the third set of cultivation plans had to be combined with a certain amount of talent and basic resources to achieve the expected cultivation effect. Not to mention the ordinary aptitude of the children from civilian families. Even if they sold everything, they would not be able to gather the resources needed for the third set of cultivation plan. It was already very good to be able to learn the second set of cultivation plan. After sorting out all the messy information, Li Yueming finally adapted to his current body. He slowly stretched his body. Li Yueming felt a stabbing pain in his chest and abdomen. If he was not mistaken, this should be the after effect of his predecessor's crazy cultivation. After all, a martial artist's cultivation was about seeking and progressing gradually. Not only would his last-minute practice not increase his strength, but it might also cause his blood and qi to flow backward and hurt his body. After sensing for a while, Li Yueming slowly closed his eyes. This level of injury was impossible for his predecessor to recover without recuperating for a year and a half. However, to Li Yueming, it was just a small injury. It was not even considered an injury. After figuring out the various meridians in his body and the operating principle of this so-called third cultivation method for personal magnificent power cultivators, Li Yueming used his unlimited genetic body to unblock the acupoints in several key locations. After a few breaths, a faint mist rose from his body. His body, which had been damaged by excessive cultivation and exhaustion, recovered in an instant. At the same time, his originally weak body had also been strengthened by an unknown amount during this simple blood circulation. This was because his body was too weak and could not withstand the powerful strength and evolution brought about by the unlimited genetic body. Feeling the blood in his body that was like a surging river, Li Yueming opened his eyes and muttered to himself, "Do you want to become a Black Star Trooper? Interesting dream, perhaps I can help you realize it." Chapter 756, A Level 1 Martial Artist, Shocking, _1. His predecessor's greatest dream was to become a soldier of the interstellar army, to go to the distant battlefield where his parents died and burn an incense stick for them. If things went according to the normal course of events, this dream of his predecessor would eventually become a lifelong regret. Now, Li Yueming had the ability to help him realize this dream. Perhaps it was not that the God of Stars did not respond, but that he used such a strange method to realize his predecessor's dream. Shaking his head and waking up from his chaotic thoughts, Li Yueming tried to stretch his tired body. After making sure that the stinging feeling in his body due to excessive exercise had completely disappeared, he slowly heaved a sigh of relief. The ward was very crowded, and the smell of disinfectant was also very pungent. Li Yueming obviously did not like such an environment. He pulled off the messy equipment on his body and walked down from the bed. At this moment, the door of the ward was pushed open from the outside. A young girl of 17 or 18 years old walked in with a basin of hot water. Seeing Li Yueming struggling to get up, the girl stopped and suppressed her anger. "Hey, you annoying fellow! You're so seriously injured, why aren't you lying down? Don't you think it's not enough to cause trouble for my parents and me?" Hearing the girl's voice, Li Yueming was stunned. He looked at the door and saw the girl's angry face. After pausing for a moment, he immediately recognized the girl in front of him. The girl was called Li Linglong, 16 years old this year, and was his uncle's daughter. In other words, she was his cousin. Ever since his parents had died on the battlefield, he had been staying at his uncle and aunt's house because he was not an adult. Now that he was sent to the hospital because of an injury from overworking, he naturally had to trouble his uncle and aunt, who were his guardians, to take care of him. His uncle was a worker in a military factory, while his aunt was the front desk supervisor of a restaurant in Montenegro City. Both of them were ordinary wage earners. They did not have enough leave to take care of Li Yueming, so they could only ask their cousin, Li Linglong, to take leave to take care of him. That's why his cousin was full of resentment towards him. After all, before Li Yueming took over their family, she was the only little princess in the family. Although she didn't have the best food and clothing, she never had to worry about it. Ever since Li Yueming came, she had to give Li Yueming a share of everything. Li Yueming was still thinking about his connections. However, Li Linglong was obviously not willing to let him off so easily. After she walked into the ward and placed the basin on the table, she picked up the towel that was still steaming and handed it to Li Yueming while complaining, "Really, I'm obviously going to take part in the military assessment the year after next. Why should I take care of a piece of trash like you at this critical moment? If you don't have talent, you still have to force yourself. If you continue to train like this, you'll become a cripple. It's best if you go to a rehabilitation center for the disabled yourself." Seeing that he was still in a daze, she did not take the towel. The expression on Li Linglong's face turned even uglier. She said angrily, "Hey, wash your face yourself." Hearing this, Li Yueming finally woke up from his dream. He raised his head and glanced at Li Linglong, who was still a little immature, and then at the towel that was emitting hot air in her hand. Li Yueming did not show any anger or other unnecessary emotions. He calmly took the towel from her hand and wiped his face before asking, "What day is it today?" His seemingly indifferent calm attitude made Li Linglong, who was originally a little aggressive, freeze. She felt as if her fist had hit cotton. If it was any other day, Li Linglong would have exploded immediately. But this time, for some reason, although Li Yueming did not show any remorse for his actions, Li Linglong felt as if she was suffocating when she saw his deep and quiet eyes. Li Linglong took a few steps back in shock. She barely managed to calm herself down. "You? Why are you asking this? The most important thing now is to take care of my body. I haven't found a boyfriend yet. I don't want to serve a disabled person like you every day." Although the young lady's tone was as stern as ever, the slightly weak expression on her face completely revealed her stern appearance and inner turmoil. What was going on? In the past, she had despised and insulted Li Yueming many times. Although Li Yueming would occasionally talk back, most of the time, he just kept silent. However, no matter what, he had never spoken a single sentence or looked at her like he did today. Li Yueming didn't answer her question. Although this reincarnation was no longer as difficult as the previous reincarnations, it didn't mean that this reincarnation was more difficult than the previous ones. The most important thing was that the previous reincarnations had a clear goal, and the main mission was mostly to be safe. This reincarnation was completely different. With the Zergs attacking the Alliance of Order, it was useless to just stay safe. The main mission naturally couldn't focus on ensuring one's own safety like in the past. Instead, he should try his best to play his role to the greatest extent and rewrite or reverse the situation of the entire universe war. Therefore, Li Yueming's time was limited, and he had no time to waste. He had to leave this small planet as soon as possible and head to the central universe where there was more information. Seeing that Li Linglong did not answer directly, Li Yueming asked again, "I asked you what day it is today." Chapter 757, A Level 1 Martial Artist, Shocking, _2. This time, he emphasized his tone. Although there was no actual movement. But who was Li Yueming? He had been a king-level figure who had unified the world for several generations. Even though he hadn't recovered his strength yet, facing a young girl was still a blow to him. He didn't even need to leak his aura. Just a simple question was already something that ordinary people couldn't bear. He stared at her with his abyss-like eyes. Li Linglong finally didn't dare to continue nagging. She timidly took a few steps back and replied in a low voice, "Today is the 29th of July, year 2088 of the Montenegro Empire's planet calendar." July 29th? There was only half a month left before the military college assessment. Although he couldn't prepare fully, this amount of time was definitely enough for him to get into the military academy. After confirming this, Li Yueming heaved a sigh of relief. Li Linglong heaved a sigh of relief almost at the same time when she saw the terrifying aura on his body suddenly dissipate. When Li Yueming wasn't paying attention, she secretly looked at him with a sympathetic look on her face. When she saw Li Yueming's gaze, she quickly looked away and pretended to rub the towel in the basin. After a while, she restrained her usual sharp and mean attitude and said in a low voice, "Hey, I know you're upset, but the doctor has already said that with your current condition, there was really no way for him to continue participating in the military academy's assessment. Don't force yourself. For uncle and auntie, and for our family, okay?" Although the girl hated Li Yueming for snatching what should have belonged to her, she often ridiculed Li Yueming. However, Li Yueming was still her cousin, and blood was still thicker than water. Even if Li Yueming didn't tell anyone. However, whether it was Li Linglong or her uncle and aunt, they could all feel the obsession in his heart. The fact that he was unable to participate in the military academy's assessment due to his physical condition was definitely a huge blow to Li Yueming's spirit and soul. Therefore, after noticing that Li Yueming's emotions were not right, the girl changed her usual unruly attitude and comforted Li Yueming. He could feel the tenderness in Li Linglong's words. Li Yueming also restrained his aura and said as truthfully as possible, "I'm not forcing myself, and I won't force myself. However, I really feel that my body's condition isn't as bad as I imagined." As he spoke, he pushed himself up with both hands and stood up from the bed like a carp. Although she was still wearing a blue and white hospital gown. But Li Yueming still gently stretched his body. Suddenly, all the muscles in his body swelled up. There was even a visible qi that was swimming in the meridians of his body like a flood dragon. Seeing this, Li Linglong widened her eyes and covered her mouth. She took a few steps back and said in disbelief, You, is this the aura of a warrior?" Because she was so shocked, she even knocked over the basin. The so-called warrior's aura she mentioned was the phenomenon that appeared when the martial arts cultivation method cultivated on this planet broke through the first level. From Li Yueming's point of view, it was actually a powerful aura condensed from the various apertures in the body after the physique was tempered to a certain extent. The principle was similar to the martial arts world back then. The only difference was that although this universal martial arts cultivation method did not sound too eye-catching, it might even make people who did not understand it mistakenly think that it was just a basic ordinary cultivation method. However, this was actually a super cultivation technique that gathered the blood and sweat of countless martial arts experts in the entire central universe. The aura that was cultivated was much more terrifying than the nameless divine art in the small world. Just a small wisp could easily destroy a mountain. If it wasn't for the Zerg, this great enemy, it was impossible for such a cultivation technique to be promoted to the entire universe for free. Therefore, it was no wonder that Li Linglong had lost her composure. The aura lingering around Li Yueming's body was clearly no different from the warrior aura that he had cultivated after he had entered the third set of cultivation methods for individual mighty strength martial artists. The sudden commotion in the ward attracted the attention of the outside world. Soon, a few doctors wearing stethoscopes barged in. After seeing Li Yueming's aura, everyone was dumbfounded. The male doctor who diagnosed Li Yueming looked as if he had seen a ghost. He repeatedly stared at Li Yueming's body and confirmed that he was not hallucinating. He said with a face full of doubt, "What's going on?" When I checked you previously, I clearly found that your ligaments and meridians were severely strained. You might have to sit in a wheelchair for the rest of your life." In the end, not only could he move freely now, but he even possessed the aura of a martial artist. The news spread like wildfire. The entire hospital was in an uproar. Some doctors who didn't believe him dragged Li Yueming for a full-body checkup. In the end, it was confirmed that Li Yueming's body had completely recovered and he had even broken through to level 1 martial artist. A group of white-haired old doctors looked at Li Yueming. Their eyes were like a thirsty man who had just met a young girl who had just finished bathing. It was not an exaggeration to describe them as ferocious. A doctor even held Li Yueming and Li Linglong's hands and said, "This is really unbelievable. Can the patient and his family provide some blood for our hospital to do a more in-depth examination?" As if afraid of being rejected, the doctor hurriedly said, "As compensation for providing the blood, we can reimburse the patient's hospitalization fees. In addition, we will pay you 30,000 universe credits. If we can figure out how you healed your injuries and broke through, the reward will be more negotiable." Li Yueming didn't say anything. Li Linglong rolled her eyes and said, "Tisk, who cares about your stinking money? My brother is now a level 1 martial artist and has a high chance of being accepted by the military academy. You want to use him as an experimental subject? Sure, go to the military committee and declare." Hearing this, the doctor immediately cowered and quickly laughed. No, I didn't mean that." Li Linglong only snorted coldly. Did he mean that? Who knew? Li Yueming didn't say anything. He knew it would cause a commotion. However, there was no way for him to be discharged from the hospital and participate in the military assessment in half a month. Thus, he could only resort to this method. Anyway, according to the plan, he would not stay on this planet for too long. Even if he caused some trouble, it should not matter. The disturbance did not last long. About half an hour later, the group of doctors who were watching the show were ordered to return to their departments. Only Li Yueming and Li Linglong were left in the ward, as well as his uncle and aunt who had just received the news and rushed over. Looking at Li Yueming who was already moving freely, the uncle heaved a sigh of relief and smiled, "Brat, you almost scared your aunt and I to death. It's good that your body is fine. I'll make some soup for you when we go back tonight." As for the assessment in half a month, the middle-aged bald man glanced at Li Yueming and confirmed that the latter's expression did not change much. Then, he said word by word, "Why don't you not participate? After all, you're the only seedling in my family. I'm still counting on you to spread your branches and leaves. Even if you want to join the army, you have to get married and have 2 children first, right?" Li Yueming looked at his uncle and sighed after a long silence. The world was good. His family was also very harmonious. How good would it be if it wasn't just a dream but a reality? Perhaps, probably, the people he was destined to meet were still waiting for him in the unpredictable future, right? After completing this final examination, would he be able to meet in the reality, as he wished? Li Yueming didn't know, but it didn't stop him from looking forward to it. He did not reply. The uncle's voice became softer and he scratched his head awkwardly. "Ahaha. It's fine if you're unwilling. Uncle is just a little worried about your safety. Back then, your parents..." Before his uncle could finish, Li Linglong and his aunt glared at him fiercely. He really brought up a sore spot. Chapter 758, Starry Sky Aristocrat Martial Arts School. The topic of his deceased parents was always the scar on Li Yueming's chest, and he was not willing to be mentioned easily. The uncle also realized that he had said something wrong. Under the angry gazes of his aunt and Li Linglong, he smiled embarrassedly and shut his mouth obediently. The aunt smiled and changed the topic. "Since you've recovered, let's go through the discharge procedures now. The hospital is not a good place. If you can, don't stay." Li Linglong also nodded in agreement and said, "I still have to go back to class." I'm not in the mood to be a nanny here. Li Yueming naturally had no objection to this. In fact, he had used his perfect genetic body to heal his injuries, so he could be discharged as soon as possible. The few of them walked around Li Yueming. After confirming that he was not feeling unwell, the aunt sent her uncle to go through the discharge procedures. Although the hospital was very interested in why Li Yueming had suddenly recovered, Li Yueming was now a martial artist. Even if he was only a level 1 martial artist, his social status was different from that of ordinary people. He was not someone they could provoke. Therefore, he could only go through the discharge procedures for Li Yueming. The afternoon sky was slightly yellow. The four of them walked out of the hospital together and left in the second-hand pickup truck that their uncle had bought. That night, in order to welcome Li Yueming's safe return, the family gathered together and held a simple dinner. This was because the war on the front lines was getting more and more intense. The mineral resources and labor output of many starfields behind the Alliance of Order were mainly contributed to the military industry. 7 to 20,003 it was the same on the planet. About 50 years ago, the third line of defense of the Alliance of Order was broken through by the Zergs. Since then, the civilian factories and labor force on Planet 7 to 20,003 were recruited by the Military Council to become part of the military industry to support the front line. It was also from then on that the daily food, water, and entertainment resources provided to the residents of Planet 7 to 20,003 were greatly reduced. Even holding a banquet for an ordinary family was considered a luxury. They ate and drank well. Uncle and auntie still had to go to work tomorrow, so they went to bed early. On the other hand, Li Linglong didn't sleep with her classmates. However, taking leave to take care of Li Yueming had delayed her studies. Now that she finally had a moment of leisure time, she had to make good use of it. Compared to Li Yueming's predecessor, who liked to be incompetent and furious, she was quite talented. The teachers in the academy had praised her many times in front of her uncle and aunt that she had the opportunity to enter the military academy and become an officer. Li Linglong also cherished this hard-earned hope. In school, regardless of whether it was cultural studies or martial arts training, he gritted his teeth and persevered, never falling behind. At this moment, the sky of Planet 7 to 20,003 had completely darkened. The night shrouded the slightly lonely planet, and through the smooth glass, one could see the bustling lights on the opposite side of the street. Everything in sight seemed so dull. It was as if he was far away from the hustle and bustle, giving Li Yueming the illusion that he had never transmigrated. He closed his eyes and carefully sensed for a moment. Li Yueming sighed and opened his eyes again, staring at his reflection on the glass window. So, would such a medium-sized planet turn into a bubble after a few decades because of the Zergs' surprise attack? It seemed that the Zergs were really doomed. All along, the reincarnators, including Li Yueming, did not have much sense of the so-called Zerg invasion. After all, in the past, they had seen everything with the vision of a reincarnator. Even the world they entered could not give them a sense of reality, let alone the ordinary people who had nothing to do with them. If the reincarnators encountered danger, they could just clap their hands and give up the reward to return to the reincarnation world. However, very few people thought about the outcome of the people in the world they went to. Li Yueming also understood that the prime material world was just an untraceable space in the crack of time. The world he was reincarnated in was the real world. Only then did he truly feel the coldness and terror of the Zerg. They were endless and had extremely strong evolutionary and reproductive abilities. Wherever it passed, life, minerals, and even the planet itself would be mercilessly devoured, turning into nutrients for the expansion of their race. This unreasonable expansion could be called a disaster. A planet could be destroyed in the blink of an eye. However, behind this planet, how many lives lived on this planet were destroyed? There were many families like uncle and auntie, many young men and women like Li Linglong who were full of shock for the future, and many touching hopes and miracles. Just like that, they were all erased from the source. The sin behind it. Bamboo is hard to write. Thinking of this, Li Yueming clenched his fists. In the beginning, he completed this mission purely to protect himself and to protect his friends and family that might appear in the future. But now, he could already feel the heavy responsibility on his shoulders. Trillions of lives, countless planets, all of them were connected to him through the universe-grade time and space treasure. A lot of information flashed through his mind. Li Yueming stopped thinking. He sat cross-legged silently and began to use infinite deduction to analyze the third cultivation plan for personal magnificent power cultivators. Although Li Yueming quickly broke through the boundary between mortals and martial artists with the experience of reincarnation in many worlds, this did not mean that Li Yueming completely understood this cultivation plan. Chapter 759, Starry Sky Martial Arts School. One had to know that this was a cultivation method jointly formulated by the peak martial artists of all the major planets in the universe. The more he deduced, the deeper he went. Even Li Yueming couldn't help but be intoxicated. If the star moon art that he created himself was the most suitable cultivation method for him, then, the third cultivation plan for individual mighty power warriors was the most suitable plan for all intelligent life forms in the universe to cultivate martial arts. In order to gather the power of the entire universe to defend against the foreign forces, the Alliance of Law did not hide anything in this regard. Of course, even if they had kept their thoughts to themselves at the beginning, after so many years of war, the higher UPS of the Alliance of Law and Order had long been awakened. If they couldn't abandon internal strife and unite against the outside world, the Alliance of Law would have been defeated long ago. It was impossible to barely hold the current line of defense. There was no doubt that this was a bottomless treasure for Li Yueming. Through the third cultivation method of personal power and the star and moon arts, he was confident that he could cultivate the path of martial arts to an extremely terrifying level in a very short period of time. Time always passed very quickly after activating the infinite deduction talent. The next morning, Li Yueming opened his eyes, and his eyes revealed a hint of surprise. Infinite deduction was a golden talent. It was the foundation of Li Yueming's existence. However, as he faced more and more unknown over the years, the unpredictable experts became more and more terrifying. The efficiency of the infinite deduction talent became lower and lower, and the accuracy was also greatly reduced. In fact, he was already somewhat unable to keep up with Li Yueming's version. However, he did not expect that after binding the shiny gold talent, the machinery god, the efficiency of the infinite deduction talent would be greatly improved. The most obvious increase in deduction efficiency was that the speed of digesting and absorbing secret manuals had increased by dozens of times. After thinking for a while, Li Yueming understood the reason. It should be because the machinery god's talent increased intelligence, and the brain's intelligence was the most basic hardware that supported infinite deduction. It was similar to the CPU in computers. The combination of the two talents was equivalent to replacing the infinite deduction talent with a more powerful CPU. It was only natural that the efficiency would increase greatly. Without a doubt, this was good news for Li Yueming. After all, the third cultivation plan for personal mighty power cultivators was the result of the joint construction of countless top martial arts experts. The information contained in it was simply too terrifying. According to the original operating efficiency of the infinite deduction, Li Yueming might not be able to fully comprehend the third cultivation method for personal magnificent power cultivators even if he spent hundreds or even thousands of years on it. Now that his computing power had increased by dozens of times, it still took a long time. But no matter what, he could still see the end. He suppressed the joy in his heart and the urge to continue deducing. He glanced at the alarm clock on the bedside table. After confirming that it was about time, Li Yueming got up and went to the wardrobe to find the school uniform that his predecessor often wore. In a few decades, this planet would be crushed by the Zergs, and if he wanted to fully comprehend the third cultivation plan for personal mighty power cultivators, he would need a long time, starting from thousands of years. Sitting here studying the cultivation technique was not trying to hide his strength, but waiting for death. The most important thing now was to pass the military academy's assessment and become a member of the Interstellar Army. After spending some time putting on his school uniform, Li Yueming looked at himself in the mirror and tidied up his image. Only then did he realize that no matter which world he reincarnated into, his appearance was still quite good. As expected, the reincarnation mark understood him. When he pushed open the door, he saw Li Linglong also dressed up and preparing to go to school. The two of them bumped into each other. Li Linglong looked at Li Yueming from head to toe and snorted coldly. She did not say anything and went straight to the living room. Li Yueming was already used to this. His uncle and aunt had already gone to work, and breakfast was placed on the table. 3 eggs and 2 bacon sandwiches were Li Yueming's entire breakfast. It sounded like a lot, but for martial arts students who needed to engage in physical training, it was just the basics. Some wealthy families would even prepare special nutrition paste for their children for breakfast in order to supplement their children's physical consumption. The nutrition paste was specially made by the Interstellar Military Factory of the martial arts side of the Third Universe and was quite expensive. With his uncle and aunt's wealth, they naturally could not afford it. Li Linglong didn't look tall, but her physical fitness was surprisingly good. She ate a similar breakfast as Li Yueming. After a simple bite, Li Yueming took the lead and finished eating. He took the food and rushed to the academy without looking back. Montenegro City's Starry Sky Aristocrat Martial Arts School, Grade 12 Class 6. This was the school that Li Yueming was studying at. Li Linglong was walking in the same direction as him. However, she was studying at a commoner's college, so they were only walking in the same general direction. Their destination was naturally far away. Montenegro City was the second largest city on Planet 7 to 20,003, and the Starry Sky Aristocrat Martial Academy was considered famous in the entire Black Mountain City. This was also the biggest reason why his predecessor was willing to endure Li Linglong's rolling eyes and spend a lot of money to enter. After all, his predecessor was not stupid at all. He could even be said to be quite clear-headed. He had long known that his aptitude was not good. If one's aptitude wasn't good, if one couldn't enter a well-known martial arts school to study, it was probably impossible for one to pass the military academy's assessment. Chapter 760, Starry Sky Aristocrat Martial Arts School. Right now, he was looking at the huge school gate that towered into the clouds. Li Yueming was also secretly surprised. After all, he had entered many reincarnation worlds. However, this so-called Starry Sky Aristocrat Martial Arts School was truly unique to the school gates that could be built in such a grand manner. There were not many students at the entrance. After all, most of the students who studied here stayed in school to board. Only students like Li Yueming who couldn't afford the expensive boarding fees would choose to go to school. He took out his campus card and swiped it through the access control machine. A clear mechanical voice sounded, "Li Yueming, Grade 12 Class 6, Identity Verified. Student Li Yueming, it is said that you have taken 7 days off due to health reasons. Is your body all right now that you have returned to school?" This was the Universal AI A001, which was not something that could be developed with the technology of Planet 7 to 20,003. The reason why they were able to meet here today was undoubtedly because they had joined the Alliance of Law. Li Yueming nodded and replied, "As you can see, my body has already recovered." The artificial intelligence paused for a moment before saying, "All right, I've already submitted your application information to Grade 12 Class 6's form teacher, Bulletin Wia. A smart assistant will inform you of today's training venue later. I hope you will always be healthy." Although it was only a universal AI, it was obvious that the program named A001 was already quite mature. He didn't leave but stared at A001 for a moment. He didn't expect A001 to take the initiative to reply, "Li Yueming, is there anything else I can help you with?" Li Yueming felt that this thing was really interesting. He was now considered half an expert in machinery and technology. If he could take it down and study it, he might be able to make a copy. However, it seemed a little dangerous to have such thoughts in public. There would be plenty of opportunities to become stronger in the future. There was no need to take such a big risk now. After shaking his head, Li Yueming walked into the academy. Looking at Li Yueming's back, A001 revealed a confused look. Obviously, it noticed that Li Yueming's gaze was a little strange, but unfortunately, its limited intelligence made it unable to understand the meaning. If it was A002 or A003, they should be able to analyze a part of it, right? The Starry Sky Aristocrat Martial School occupied an extremely vast area. Just the gate alone was already towering into the clouds, and the various activities and facilities inside were naturally even more spacious. It couldn't be helped. Martial artists, even if they were only level 1 martial artists, would cause a lot of noise when they moved. If the school's facilities weren't solid enough and the land wasn't vast enough, it would probably be completely demolished by the students and teachers in less than 3 to 5 years. According to the fragmented memories of his predecessor, Li Yueming managed to find the way to grade 12 class 6. However, the teacher was probably already doing physical training with the boarding students. As a day student, he would not be able to find anyone in the class. He had to wait for A001 to confirm the teacher's movements before sending an assistant to bring him to the location to meet up with his classmates. A001 didn't let Li Yueming wait. About 10 minutes later, Li Yueming received the location information from A001 on his personal terminal. According to the guidance of the navigation terminal, Li Yueming transferred to a few other means of transportation in the huge college before finally finding his class on the field. Chapter 761, Final Review, Combat Training, _1. The internal space of the Starry Sky Aristocrat Martial Academy was very spacious. Li Yueming finally found his class in Activity Room 072 after he had changed to several different means of transportation. On the incomparably huge plaza of the Comprehensive Activity Room, there were already nearly 100 students lined up neatly on both sides of the actual combat stage. From afar, they looked like a large group of ants. After noticing Li Yueming approaching, a one-armed man who looked to be about 40 years old walked over silently. His sharp and cold eyes glanced at Li Yueming and said, "Why are you here again?" The one-armed man in front of him was called Bulletin Wea. He was the form teacher of grade 12 class 6. He heard that he was a member of the Interstellar Army when he was young and had personally gone to the front lines. After losing an arm, he was forced to retire from the army. He was given a disability allowance and a job as a martial arts school teacher by the military committee. Only then did he become a homeroom teacher of grade 12 class 6. Because of his cold personality and lack of humor, Bulletin Wea was also known as Boshita by his students and teachers behind his back. Of course, jokes were jokes, but no one in the entire Starry Sky College dared to deny the quality of Bulletin Wea's teaching. Every year, 3 to 5 students in the military college's assessment would graduate from his hands. Cold-faced instructor, one-armed soldier king. Behind each of these titles was the respect, envy, jealousy, and hatred of the Starry Sky College and Bulletin Wea. The reason why his predecessor had gone crazy with his training, even at the cost of damaging his body, was because Bulletin Wea had determined that he didn't have the aptitude and mentality to become a member of the Interstellar Army. This was naturally a great contempt and denial for his predecessor, who had wanted to go to the starry sky of the universe since he was young. Therefore, the relationship between teachers and students had never been very good. Of course, those things were caused by his predecessor, so Li Yueming had no interest in continuing to be entangled. He looked down at Bulletin Wea, who had a cold expression on his face. If it were any other fledgling student, they would probably have cramps in their legs and stomachs under his gaze. After all, he had been in the army for many years. Even though he had been retired for more than 10 years, Bulletin Wea still had a murderous aura that made one's heart palpitate. It was a strong sense of oppression that could only be produced by killing a lot of people. It was not something that underage children who lived in a peaceful society at the rear line of defense could face. In fact, that was indeed the case. Behind him, the neatly arranged students were all secretly watching the situation here. Their eyes were full of sympathy and a hint of schadenfreude when they looked at Li Yueming, but no one dared to make any movements. Obviously, they enjoyed watching Li Yueming embarrass himself in front of Buletin. He just didn't dare to show it on this occasion. However, Li Yueming acted as if nothing had happened. He looked straight into Buletin's eyes and replied neither obsequiously nor arrogantly, "Teacher, I was on sick leave previously. Now that I've recovered, I'll naturally come back." Hearing his answer, all of a sudden, the students on both sides of the training field looked at Li Yueming in surprise. Why did this kid suddenly become so awesome after going back? He actually dared to speak loudly under the death gaze of Stone Diviner? Did he eat the guts of a bear or a leopard? Buletin was clearly surprised as well. He sized up Li Yueming before saying, "Didn't I tell you before? With your talent and mentality, you won't be able to get into the military academy. Even if you are lucky enough to get into a military academy, you won't even be able to be cannon fodder on the battlefield. You will only die in vain." At this point, Buletin paused. He lowered his head and took out a white piece of paper from his undergarments before continuing, "I've already received the physical examination report from the hospital. Although I don't know how you convinced your family to let you leave the hospital, judging from the current burden on your body, continuing to exercise will only be asking for trouble. Go back, you are not welcome here." As he spoke, Buletin threw the report to Li Yueming and turned to leave. Li Yueming silently took the report and glanced at it. It was sent to Buletin by the hospital a few days ago. The cold-faced instructor in front of him must have taken the initiative to go to the hospital to get the information after knowing that Li Yueming was injured. Although his words sounded cold and heartless, it was actually for Li Yueming's own good. This is how humans are like. Sometimes, those who said unpleasant words actually had good intentions. His words were flowery, but in reality, he was hiding a knife behind honey and killing people invisibly. Although Buletin was indeed doing this for his own good. However, Li Yueming obviously wouldn't let him leave just like that. Stepping out of the portal, Li Yueming arrived in front of Buletin in an instant. He said indifferently, "Teacher Buletin, you seem to have misunderstood something. My body is very healthy right now. If you don't believe me, you can try." Buletin felt his vision blur. When he came back to his senses, he realized that Li Yueming had already blocked his path. Forcefully suppressing the shock in his heart, Buletin took 2 steps back and cried out, "You've become a martial artist? What level?" Li Yueming was very restrained. He didn't make any further moves after getting close to Buletin. In fact, as long as he wanted to, Buletin, who had fallen from his peak state for many years, was no match for him. Chapter 762, Final Review, Combat Training, _2. However, Li Yueming only wanted to not be looked down upon. He didn't want to become a freak. Therefore, Li Yueming took 2 steps back and said, "I was lucky to break through last night. Naturally, I'm a level 1 martial artist." Buletin was momentarily dazed when he heard the words level 1 martial. Of course, his focus was not on these 4 words. A level 1 martial artist was indeed very good. It was the fundamental intersection between mortals and beyonders. However, there were already quite a number of Class 1 martial artists in Grade 12 Class 6. If one wanted to get into the military academy, a level 1 martial artist was the starting requirement. What he was really concerned about was the speed that Li Yueming had just displayed. Such a terrifying speed, was it really something that a level 1 martial artist could display? His intuition told him that it was not that simple. However, looking at Li Yueming's serious face, he didn't seem to be lying at all. In the end, Buletin chose to believe it. His face was gloomy and he did not say anything. He silently walked forward and carefully checked the strength of Li Yueming's bones and muscles. After confirming that there were no problems, he said, "Since that's the case, then join the team. There are 3 physical fitness assessments in the morning and actual combat training in the afternoon." The student had become a level 1 warrior. If it were any other teacher, they would probably be happy for a while. However, Buletin clearly didn't have such unnecessary emotions. He just didn't refuse Li Yueming to continue training. But fortunately, Li Yueming didn't care. Under the gazes of the students who were looking at the monster, he walked to the back of the line alone and stood still. The physical training in the martial arts school was quite simple. They trained their endurance by running with weights, trained their mobility by moving quickly, trained their reaction speed by dodging quickly, and trained their weapon control by comprehensive training. All of the training was based on the A0001. The difficulty of each segment would be adjusted according to the students' physical data and previous results. As long as they completed the training standards set by A0001 and the teachers of each class every day, basically every student's physical fitness could be improved to the greatest extent. After a morning of training, even Li Yueming, who didn't think much of it at first, felt that he had gained something. It could be seen that although this training method looked simple on the surface, the various paths inside were actually profound to a certain extent. Otherwise, it would definitely not be able to move Li Yueming. In a sense, this was also the benefit of the interstellar universe. Ordinary individual mighty power masters didn't have a universe supreme level master as their father, so it was impossible for them to obtain such a refined and efficient training plan at the initial stage. Not only was it perfectly compatible with the human race, in some aspects, it had even reached the peak. After a set of training, Li Yueming finally understood why his predecessor's body collapsed and ended up in the hospital after just a few more rounds of training. This training method was not just for show. Playing a few more times could really squeeze people dry. The morning's physical training ended. The combat training that was going to take place in the afternoon also piqued Li Yueming's interest. He really wanted to know what a group of young people who had gathered the power of the entire alliance of law and order could do in actual combat. During lunch, a few students came over and asked, Hey, don't tell me you think you can be arrogant in front of Bulletin Shita just because you've broken through to level 1 martial artist." Another student then winked and said, "Didn't you notice? Bulletin Shita had been staring at you with a deadpan face the entire morning. If it were me, I would probably be scared out of my wits." Li Yueming didn't pay attention to their teasing and continued to eat his lunch. The school fees weren't expensive, and the Alliance of Law and Order had subsidies, so it didn't cost much. What was really expensive was the food in the martial arts school. Under high-intensity training, a martial artist's need for food was very terrifying. Meat, eggs, milk, and various brands of nutrient fluids with various effects could not be lacking. Li Yueming spent most of his money on this. Seeing that he was eating slowly and had no intention of paying attention to them, the students felt bored and left. As they walked, they said unhappily, "Tisk, looks like he's really arrogant. He thinks he's so great just because he broke through to level 1 martial artist? Why don't you take a piss and look at yourself in the mirror?" Another person sneered. "Humph, you'll know during the actual combat training in the afternoon. A day student can only be a day student forever. They can't even afford nutrient fluids. So what if they become a level 1 martial artist? We'll still beat you up." After hearing their angry conversation, Li Yueming suddenly thought of something and glanced at the students who had walked away. If there was nothing wrong with the memory fragment of the predecessor, these people were the children of high officials on Planet 7 to 20,003. They had always looked down on day students like Li Yueming who couldn't even afford boarding school. After all, in their opinion, they should have been the top rulers of this planet. But now, because of his interstellar transformation, he was assigned to the same class as Li Yueming, a commoner. It greatly lowered their value. There were many conflicts between the two sides, but it always ended with the predecessor being defeated. From the looks of it, they were the perfect candidates for tonight's actual combat training. However, there was one thing that those rich kids had said. It was difficult to satisfy the daily training needs of the martial arts school just by relying on the nutrition in the food. In order to keep up with the nutrition, he had to prepare various nutrient solutions. Chapter 763, Final Review, Combat Training, _3. Because his realm wasn't too high, Li Yueming could still use his perfect genetic body to regulate the nutrients in his body and maintain a balance. If he continued walking, he would have to think of a way to get more nutritious items. However, this shouldn't be a problem. After all, at this critical juncture, a genius was still quite valuable. Regardless of whether it was the people at the bottom or the children of dignitaries, as long as they showed enough potential and talent, the military committee of the Alliance of Order would naturally find ways to meet all their needs. After eating the nutritious lunch, Li Yueming wiped his mouth and found a shady spot to sit down. He began to use his infinite deduction talent to analyze the third cultivation plan for personal mighty power warriors and the fourth martial artist training plan outlines that he had practiced this morning. The above was the cultivation plan. The other was a training plan. It covered all the growth needs of a martial artist who specialized in personal strength. Don't think that these two plans are not good just because their names are not eye-catching and they are all over the street. In fact, this should be the collection of the most powerful martial arts experts in the entire Alliance of Law. As long as one had talent and was willing to cultivate diligently, they could grow into a very powerful martial arts expert with these two methods. Even if the analysis of the two programs of the creator of the door is a loss of effort. To Li Yueming, it was a very luxurious experience pack. In addition to the meal, all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. As he continued to deduce, the lunch break soon passed. Because the military assessment was going to start in a few days, the team combat training in the afternoon had been changed to individual combat training. In addition, in order to be closer to the various accidents that might happen during the assessment, the individual training with A0001 as the sparring partner was no longer going there, but became a real battle between the students. It was still the same training ground in the morning, and it was still the same martial arts practice arena. More than 80 students from grade 12 class 6 lined up neatly in 2 rows. Each group consisted of 5 groups of 10 people. They entered the martial arts stage in pairs in order to prepare for the actual combat PK. The remaining people stood on both sides of the martial arts stage to watch the battle. Buletin Wea, who was the homeroom teacher and had rich combat experience, acted as the lecturer, explaining the details and essentials of the battle to the students. He also corrected the students' mistakes in the demonstration on the martial arts stage at any time. Compared to the other classes, which had all kinds of fancy operations, the final review arranged by Bowie was also extremely simple. However, because he had actual combat experience that other teachers could not match, his class was more practical than other teachers' classes. After all, the battlefield was ever-changing. There would be no standard artificial intelligence like A0001 to guide them, and there would be no sandbag-like opponents to stand on the spot and take a beating. There was only endless uncertainty. As for the other teachers, because they were in the rear and did not have much actual combat experience, they were unable to teach the students to adapt to the situation. Therefore, the final combat training of grade 12 class 6 had always been the target of many classes in the Starry Sky College. When the students were ready to fight on the stage, the other teachers would also bring their students here to learn. The number of people watching the battle instantly soared from 60 to more than 200. Although it still seemed small compared to the huge martial arts stage, it still made the scene quite noisy. Buletin Wea was quite generous with regards to this. He would never hide anything just because there were other teachers who framed him behind his back. However, the group of students were not so relaxed. They could not help but become nervous under the watchful eyes of everyone. Li Yueming was the last batch to go up. Compared to the other restless students, he was much calmer. He was sitting alone on the field with his eyes closed, deducing 2 sets of plans for his personal power. When the few rich kids who were having lunch saw this, they couldn't help but smile. Still pretending to be calm? I don't know where you'll put your face when we teach you a lesson in front of so many people later. This time, their luck was very good. Coincidentally, he was in the same group as Li Yueming. Chapter 764, Special Referrer. There were a total of 96 students in grade 12 class 6. The actual combat training consisted of 10 students in a group. The students in front of the line fought for an average of 10 to 15 minutes. Therefore, it was only Li Yueming's turn after about 2 hours. During this process, he had also carefully observed the battles of his classmates. It was as he had expected. This group of students actually had very average combat experience. After all, Planet 7 to 20,003 was located behind the Alliance of Law's cosmic defense line. Both students and teachers rarely had the chance to engage in actual combat. Although he had the A001 Universal Artificial Intelligence, which could simulate the actual situation of the battlefield with a 100% accuracy, he was still able to use the A001 Universal Artificial Intelligence. However, in the entire Starry Sky Aristocrat Martial Arts School and even Planet 7 to 20,003, there were no students or teachers who could pass the 100% real difficulty assessment. How could they take the initiative to start such hellish training for no reason? Of course, the main reason was that Planet 7 to 20,003 was located behind the defense line. Whether it was the teachers or the students, none of them had truly experienced the tension and pressure of the Zerg invasion. There was also no huge pressure on the edge of life and death like some planets in the front line. The main reason why they yearned to become a member of the Black Star Army was because of the good treatment and high social status of the Black Star Army. It also allowed them to leave the side Planet 7 to 20,003 and head to the endless prosperous countries in the universe. Under such circumstances, how could he expect them to treat the war with such a serious attitude? It was estimated that he would only be able to wake up from his half-baked attitude after he truly experienced the horror of life and death. However, they only realized it at that time. Would the heavens give them another chance? Li Yueming didn't know and couldn't care less. The universe of order was vast, and 7 to 20,003 was just a remote planet that was not valued. No one really cared about their life and death. Only by showing enough value could they be valued. He thought about it. The second to last batch of students had already come down from the field. All of them were excitedly discussing the cool moves with their classmates. The other students were also very happy. It was obvious that they had gained a lot from the actual combat training just now. The form teacher of grade 12 class 5 even took the initiative to walk over and say to Buletinwia, "Old Bo, the quality of your students is quite good. I feel that this year's outstanding class will be awarded to you again." Buletinwia glanced at him. His face was still as cold as ever. There wasn't even a hint of a smile on his face. He said in a flat and cold tone, "This kind of performance is only cannon fodder on the battlefield. It can't even be considered cannon fodder, so what if he got into the military academy?" Hearing his emotionless words, as if he was stating a fact. The homeroom teacher of grade 12 class 5's face twitched, but he did not dare to say anything because of Buletinwia's murderous aura. He simply turned around and left. A moment later, the form teachers of the other classes quickly gathered around. The form teacher of grade 12 class 5 said in a low voice, "I've lost again. Old Bo is really a stone in the latrine pit, smelly and hard." The form teacher of grade 12 class 2 also nodded and echoed, "Although the front-line battlefield is indeed not optimistic, the Alliance of Law represents the entire central universe. The situation shouldn't be that bad, right?" The form teacher of grade 12 class 4 also joined in the discussion. "That's right, that's right. There are countless experts on hundreds of millions of high-grade planets. I even heard that the second cosmos and the first cosmos have immortal cultivators and Chinook whose fundamental powers are completely different from ours in the third cosmos, with so many mighty figures supporting us, even if the sky falls, it won't be able to hit us. The form teacher of grade 12 class 1 had the deepest prejudice against Buletin. Before Buletin had come, he was the most outstanding teacher in the Starry Sky Martial Academy. Now that this glory had been taken away so easily, it was naturally impossible for him to have a good impression of Buletin. At this moment, he sneered. He's just deliberately trying to scare the public. Otherwise, wouldn't there be no reasonable excuse for him to lose an arm on the battlefield and be carried back like a dead dog? Although the other teachers agreed with this humiliating statement, no one refuted it. After all, compared to offending the narrow-minded form teacher of grade 12 class 1, it was wiser to offend Buletin, who did not care about these rumors at all. While the few form teachers were discussing, Buletin had already reprimanded the students who had been laughing earlier. He had also corrected all their shortcomings. Li Yueming and a few other students were also ready to enter the actual combat training ground. Buletin put down the other students who had already completed the assessment. Under everyone's gaze, he took the initiative to walk towards the last batch of students. This action immediately attracted everyone's attention. This wasn't the normal process of actual combat training. By right, Buletin should have announced the start of the assessment and let the students enter the martial arts stage. Under everyone's gaze, Buletin slowly walked to Li Yueming and stood in front of him. Looking at the composed student before him, Buletin said, "In this practical training, I want you to fight against the other 9 students. What do you think?" Buletin's sudden appearance on the side of the. Now that they heard what he said to Li Yueming, the hundreds of people present were all dumbfounded. Chapter 765, Special Refermentor 2. What the hell? Let that student have a 1v9? Was Bowia's brain damaged because of his muscle spasms? Li Yueming glanced at Buletin, then at the 9 students beside him. He guessed that the trick he had shown in the morning had worked. The more Buletin thought about it, the stranger he felt. That was why he had deliberately used this training to test if he was really hiding his strength. Of course, the reason why he specifically came to ask Li Yueming instead of making a decision on his own was also to test the waters. If Li Yueming was not strong enough, he would not have agreed to the 1v9 test. On the contrary, if Li Yueming really hid his power and was willing to show his talent and potential to the outside world, then, there was a high chance that he would not let go of this excellent opportunity. At this moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Li Yueming. Clearly, they all wanted to know what kind of expression this student would have when he heard Buletin's ridiculous request. However, a situation that made them even more incomprehensible appeared. Li Yueming didn't reject him immediately. Instead, he started to weigh the pros and cons. No way, could it be that this student's brain was also filled with water? There was no doubt that there was a difference in strength between students. Otherwise, there would not be a difference between geniuses and mediocre people, between hard-working people and those who did not work hard. However, they were all taught by the same teacher, and they were also learning the 3rd cultivation plan for personal magnificent power warriors and the 4th martial artist training plan. Even if there was a gap between students, it was very limited. Except for a few cases where ordinary students who had not become level 1 martial artists and top students who had become level 1 martial artists were one-sided crushing duels, there was basically no difference in combat strength. The 10 students before him had clearly been carefully arranged by Buletin. They had gathered a small portion of grade 12 class 6s class 1 martial artists. There were no ordinary people at all. Under such circumstances, the top students' actual combat training of 1v1 was still a little strenuous, and 1v9 was purely a fantasy. They would only be beaten up one-sidedly. So what was this student thinking about? Did he really think that a 1v9 was something that could be done? Not only were the students stunned by this scene, even the teachers in charge of the classes were stunned. However, what made them even more incredulous was yet to come. Li Yueming touched his chin and thought for a moment. He actually nodded and agreed. Not only that, but he also looked relaxed. Those who didn't know better would think that he didn't agree to a 1v9 on the martial arts stage, but to a topic like let's have supper together. What the hell? This was simply nonsense. When everyone came back to their senses, that was the first thought that came to their minds, including the form teachers of the various classes. There was less than half a month left until the military college's examination. The students were already pressed for time, and now, Bulletin Wea had actually caused such a ridiculous scene at this critical moment, wasting everyone's time. There was simply something wrong with his brain. However, thinking about it carefully, compared to the cliché 1v1 combat training, this farce was quite interesting. He only hoped that the student would not suffer too badly later. After all, although the martial arts stage would not put the user's life in danger, physical pain was inevitable. Seeing that Li Yueming had really agreed to the 1v9 combat training he proposed, not to mention the other teachers and the surrounding students, even Bulletin Wea himself was shocked. Originally, he only felt that Li Yueming's sudden movement at noon was not something that a level 1 martial artist who had just broken through could show. Therefore, he specially came to see if Li Yueming was really hiding his strength. Actually, he didn't know in his heart. As the homeroom teacher, Bulletin Wea was quite attentive to the students of grade 12 class 6. Therefore, he had a relatively complete set of information on the students' families and personal personalities. Some of them were collected by the school, and most of them were collected by him out of professionalism. After all, only by deeply understanding each student's personality and family situation could he fundamentally understand the student's psychological state and formulate corresponding training strategies. Li Yueming's family background was clearly recorded in his information. His parents were members of the Interstellar Expeditionary Force. They had died on Planet 1 to 33,472 12 years ago and were currently living with his uncle and aunt. The working class did not have a strong background, and they could not even afford nutrient fluids. In order to enter the Starry Sky Aristocrat Martial Arts School, they even used the pension of their deceased parents. This kind of family situation didn't seem like a good place to support the growth of a genius. However, he never expected that Li Yueming would actually agree. In other words, if Li Yueming's brain wasn't damaged, then he really hid a part of his strength, so what she did in the morning was probably revealed to him on purpose. Was he trying to make him suspicious so that he could gain more attention or resources? Right, the military assessment was about to begin in half a month. If there was any hidden power that had not been revealed, now was indeed the best time to take it out and get the attention of the school and the military committee stationed on Planet 7 to 20,003. After all, even though the results of the military assessment couldn't be changed with or without special referees, they could change the results of the internal operations such as the division of troops and the assignment of planets after passing the assessment. The so-called special referees system was a special channel for high-level talents within the military committee. The Alliance of Orders military committee would station 3 to 5 planet commanders on most planets. As long as the talent and strength of the recommended person were recognized by any of the above big shots, they could enter the special talent training process through the internal channel after passing the assessment of the military committee. In other words, this was a backdoor that the Order Alliance Committee had opened for some talented geniuses. The only requirement was to obtain recognition before the assessment officially began. Of course, that was what he said. In fact, if one thought about it carefully, one would know how precious the quota of this system was. The entire planet had a population of hundreds of millions, and hundreds of thousands of examinees were gathered together, but there were only 3 commander-level big shots like the military committee of Planet 7 to 20,003. Tens of millions of people competed for 3 spots, and these 3 spots could not be filled every year. Normally, it was already good enough for 1 or 2 people to be chosen in a year. The terrifying level of competition could be seen from this. Those who were not considered geniuses in the entire star field could not even think about walking through. Li Yueming's sudden appearance at this time was very obvious. It was most likely because of the special referee's mechanism, but did he really have the ability to do so? Buletinwia was skeptical. However, it seemed that there was no need to think so much at the moment. He just needed to wait for Li Yueming's performance after the actual combat training began. He thought about it. Buletinwia nodded at Li Yueming and said, "Since you have no objections, let's begin." Li Yueming nodded and looked at his opponents, who were the other 9 classmates. There were a total of 6 boys and 3 girls. 8 of them were noble children, and only 2 of them came from civilian families like Li Yueming. At this moment, he felt Li Yueming's gaze on him. The 8 noble children all had angry expressions on their faces. Obviously, Li Yueming agreeing to a 1v9 in front of everyone was a huge insult to them. They didn't dare to complain about Buletinwia, who had arranged this 1v9 training, so their anger could only be focused on Li Yueming. The remaining 2 commoner children were fine, but they looked at Li Yueming with sympathy. Being targeted by so many arrogant and despotic noble children, Li Yueming would undoubtedly not end up well. Later, they would try their best to slack off. Anyway, the few of them were the same. It was just a one-sided slaughter. Under everyone's gazes, this special combat training officially began. 10 students lined up and stepped into the martial arts stage of the training ground. After everyone entered, the martial arts stage flashed with white light. Dense runes crawled out of the array below like earthworms, completely isolating the interior of the martial arts stage from the outside. The martial arts stage in the training ground was the most common beginner martial arts stage. Ordinary level 3 martial artists could not easily break through it. It could very well protect the students who were watching the battle outside from being affected by the battle in the martial arts stage. He looked at the 10 students who were as small as ants in the wide field. All the students and teachers present were curious about what was going to happen next. Chapter 766, The Ultimate Martial Skill Shocked Everyone, _1. On the martial arts stage. The white light barrier formed by the rune barrier cut off all connections between the inside and outside. The 9 students stood on the right side of the stage, while Li Yueming stood alone on the left. Looking at the indifferent Li Yueming not far away, a few noble children grinned and said, "I really don't know if I should call you a damned commoner who is bold or if you have a hole in your head. What's so great about breaking through to a level 1 martial artist? We're both level 1 martial artists. So many people against you, don't tell me you think you have a chance of winning." Li Yueming glanced at them and slowly walked forward. "You dare to call yourselves martial artists? Enjoying the best resources in the entire universe, yet not having a single heart of martial arts. To deal with a half-baked person, one did not even need to use the true strength of a martial artist." After discovering that the 3rd training plan for individual mighty power warriors and 4th training plan for warriors contained the blood and sweat of the supreme martial artist of the Alliance of Law and Order, Li Yueming had always been curious whether the strength of the young man who had practiced these 2 top-notch martial arts techniques since he was young was far beyond his knowledge. However, he did not expect that none of them could understand these 2 plans in the battle just now. This made Li Yueming disappointed. Because the promotion was too wide, there were too many cultivators. The young people did not seem to notice that there was anything special about these 2 basic plans. He even thought that this was the worst thing on the streets and was not willing to study it in peace. Thus, most of them only learned the surface, and did not taste the essence at all. Thinking about it carefully, this seemed to be a kind of helplessness. Even if the best cultivation technique in the world was presented to everyone, if the person who obtained the cultivation technique was not willing to study it diligently, how could he become a true martial arts expert? His voice was not loud, and his tone was rather flat. There was an unquestionable domineering aura in it. Although the students on the other side all wanted to retort, no one dared to take the lead to talk back. They were all frightened by Li Yueming's courage at this moment. Who was Li Yueming? Although he looked like a teenager of 17 or 18 years old on the surface, the soul inside was actually a chaotic demon god who had killed thousands of people. In front of him, even Bulletin Wea could only stand far away. Feeling the invisible pressure from Li Yueming, the 9 students subconsciously took a few steps back. It was not easy for him to suppress the strange emotions in his heart. The few of them looked at each other and saw the horror in each other's eyes. At this moment, the battle had already begun. However, they were so frightened by Li Yueming's gaze that they were rooted to the ground. For a moment, they did not even know what to do. Obviously, this was Ming Li's target. The terrifying speed of teleportation. All the students present could only see a blurry afterimage. In the next second, everyone realized that Li Yueming had already passed by the other 7 noble students and went straight to the 2 civilian martial artists. A few seconds ago, the Pingguo martial artist who was being stared at was still thinking about whether he should go easy on her and how much water he should go easy on her. However, he did not realize that Li Yueming had already disappeared from the previous battlefield and came to him along his blind spot. Now that he suddenly discovered Li Yueming's figure, his eyes were filled with disbelief. He and his other companion had been walking at the back of the team, so how could Li Yueming suddenly jump over the students in front of him and attack him? However, he was destined to never have the chance to think about this topic again. Li Yueming's left fist struck out and smashed into his chest at lightning speed. Seeing this, the warrior was delighted. If Li Yueming attacked other parts of his body, he might suffer a huge loss. However, he was wearing a piece of training armor on his chest. It could withstand a force of 1,000 kilograms. Although it might not be able to block all of Li Yueming's attack damage, it was still not enough. However, it was already a rare surprise for him to be able to offset more than half of it. As long as he did not lose too much of his combat power, he could immediately mobilize the power in his body to counter Li Yueming. However, he soon realized that he was wrong. And it was ridiculously wrong. The moment Li Yueming's fist came into contact with the heart-protecting armor on his chest, he could clearly feel a strong force that was like a wild bull spreading from his chest to his entire body. Instantly, he was sent flying like a cannonball. He flew dozens of meters before falling. Although he didn't feel any substantial damage from Li Yueming's punch, he couldn't get up no matter what. There was no doubt that he had lost his ability to fight in this state. Sure enough, in the next second, a white light flashed and a 0001's voice sounded almost at the same time. Number 10, eliminated. 9 people remaining. Fast, too fast. Silence, deathly silence. Whether it was above or below the martial arts stage, at this moment, one could hear a pin drop. The eliminated commoner warrior touched his chest. Until now, he still did not understand what had happened. Let's not talk about how Li Yueming managed to get past 7 or 8 people and get close to him in an instant. Chapter 767, The Ultimate Martial Skill Shocked Everyone, _2. Li Yueming's punch had clearly hit the heart protection mirror on his chest, and it did not cause any substantial damage to his body. How did he eliminate him directly? His mind was filled with question marks. He turned around and saw, the massacre continued. After finishing off the first commoner, Li Yueming's speed did not slow down at all. After a few ups and downs, he arrived in front of another commoner martial artist. Because of the lesson learned from the previous incident, that commoner martial artist's reaction speed was slightly faster. However, it was only a little. He was still at an absolute disadvantage under Li Yueming's attack. After 3 to 5 punches, he was sent flying by Li Yueming's punch and fell to the ground, turning into a ball of white light and dissipating. In just a blink of an eye. A 0001's voice sounded again. Number 9, eliminated the remaining 8. When the other commoner martial artist appeared in the outside world, he was also dumbfounded. When he faced Li Yueming, he did not feel any terrifying and suffocating pressure. It was as if they were just casually exchanging blows. However, he was sent flying in just 2 or 3 moves. He did not even understand how he was eliminated. Crushing. It wasn't just the suppression of consciousness. It was still a crushing defeat in terms of technique. In front of Li Yueming's martial arts techniques, they were like 3-year-old children who were powerless to resist. In the spectator stands outside the martial arts stage, hundreds of pairs of eyes were staring at everything on the screen through the surveillance camera. After seeing Li Yueming turn around and eliminate 2 people, a teacher could not help but exclaim, "D***MN, what the hell is this?" The teachers beside him were even more surprised than him. What about the energy level that represents a martial artist's power? Why didn't A0001 record it and explain it? How could he defeat these 2 level 1 martial artist students without energy levels? The teachers were all level 3 or even level 4 martial artists. However, he still felt that this strange scene was a little unbelievable. After all, the martial arts practice platform was isolated from the sight of all transcendents. They could only use their naked eyes to observe what was happening on the surveillance screen. Obviously, it was difficult for them, who were used to supernatural spying, to see everything that had happened in that instant. As the person with the most combat experience on the scene, perhaps only Buletin could roughly guess what had just happened. It was precisely because of this that he was even more shocked. Even the icy face of death that was said to not melt for 10,000 years was twitching unconsciously at this moment. If his guess was correct, he was afraid that this unremarkable student in his class would quickly attract the attention of the higher UPS in the next 10 days and become a rising star on planet 7-20003. After inviting the 2 innocent passers-by out, Li Yueming didn't continue his cold hunting journey. Instead, he stood in front of the remaining 7 noble children and waved at them. "Come on, show me whatever you have. Don't say that I didn't give you a chance." For him, this was no longer considered actual combat training. Instead, it was more like kicking a kindergarten. Although the students were all learning top-notch martial arts techniques, reality had proven that the truth was only in the hands of a few people. Even if they were given the same starting line, there would always be people willing to admit defeat. All the techniques and movements he was using now were analyzed from the 3rd cultivation plan for personal mighty power warriors. For the sake of fairness, Li Yueming didn't even use his martial arts power. With just pure techniques and strong physical fitness, it was enough to press this group of unskilled students to the ground. The remaining 7 noble children finally came back to their senses. Although they didn't know what method Li Yueming used to eliminate the 2 lowlifes, the terrifying strength that Li Yueming displayed in this instant still shocked them. At this moment, their eyelids were twitching, and they were not in the mood to continue arguing with Li Yueming's provocative words. Seeing that the situation was not good, a young man named Yin Qi among the 7 noble children took the lead to stand up. He was also the son of the high official who mocked Li Yueming during lunch in the morning. His entire body suddenly swelled up, and his muscles bulged, emitting a strange and surging aura. After the transformation of his body ended, the noble stared at Li Yueming and said, "I admit that your armed ability is very strong. You were actually able to sneak past us and even finish off the 2 of us in an instant. But that's all. Those 2 lowlifes aren't good at learning and can't even eat enough. The 7 of us aren't that bad. We get nutrient fluids and nutrient paste every day, and we enjoy the best resources. Now that you've activated your armed powers, I don't believe you can still turn the world upside down." The armed ability was a method to obtain extraordinary power by squeezing the mysterious factors in the body's cells. According to the different conditions of each person's body, the armed forces would take on many different postures. Some increased his physical fitness, while others increased the activity of his cells. The strength of an individual's armed ability would also differ greatly according to their characteristics. This method had a strong side effect at the beginning, and it was a method that would harm the enemy and oneself when one was at a dead end. The reason why it could be widely used and become one of the most powerful martial arts secret techniques recognized by the entire martial arts world was because there was a combination of the breathing method, the circulation of mysterious power, and the nourishing of the body with nutrient fluids. The side effects of activating the armed ability and squeezing the body were controlled within an acceptable range. Chapter 768, The Ultimate Martial Skill Shocked Everyone, _3. This was why the ability to equip weapons had gradually become one of the secret techniques that martial artists had to learn. At present, 5 of the 7 noble disciples had already used their armed abilities. Although the remaining 2 were still watching, it was obvious that if Li Yueming still showed his powerful posture, they would also use their trump cards. Li Yueming stood still. There was no doubt that the martial artists of this world cultivated the top-notch techniques. The way to use the armed ability was attached to the 3rd cultivation plan for personal mighty power warriors. It was also the trump card of a supreme martial artist. Now that it was used by the students, it was quite invincible. If they had more combat experience, perhaps Li Yueming would have to face them seriously. However, he was still far from reaching this standard. Li Yueming felt like a child holding a dagger. He was still a child, holding a sharp weapon. Besides, he had this weapon, but he was afraid of scaring the others. After adjusting his posture, Yin Qi, who had the deepest conflict with Li Yueming, took the lead and rushed out. At this moment, he had already fully activated his armed ability. His clothes were torn, and he turned into a 3-meter-tall giant. He waved his fists and rushed towards Li Yueming. Although his body looked heavy, however, his speed was not slow at all. In just a few breaths, he arrived in front of Li Yueming and punched out fiercely, aiming for Li Yueming's face. Li Yueming's response was simple. She took a step back and leaned her upper body back slightly. With just 2 simple actions, Yi Qi attack, which he thought was almost certain to succeed, immediately missed. After dodging the attack, Li Yueming quickly went up to the other side and said indifferently, "Too slow." As he spoke, he used his fingers as a knife and hit Yin Qi neck quickly and accurately. After the pain in his upper body, Yin Qi lower body immediately became unstable. After Li Yueming keenly noticed this, he followed up with a powerful sweeping kick. He easily knocked Yin Qi 3-meter-tall body to the ground, raising a cloud of dust. He held his extremely painful neck and rolled on the ground. Obviously, compared to the previous 2 who had lightly punched the 2 commoner children, this time Li Yueming was more particular about his attacks. This chop wouldn't eliminate Yi Qi immediately, but it would make him suffer. It could be considered a small lesson for his rudeness. He only used 2 moves. A noble who had activated his armed ability fell to the ground in an instant. Although he had not been eliminated yet, looking at the way he was rolling on the ground, it seemed that he was in more pain than being eliminated directly. All the teachers and students who were watching the battle from the outside were dumbfounded. Li Yueming's combat strength was far beyond their imagination. Simply like a monster. The 2 commoners who had been eliminated by Li Yueming previously thought that Li Yueming was cold and heartless. After all, they were still thinking of letting Li Yueming off. In the end, Li Yueming did not give them any face and eliminated them first. But now, looking at Yin Qi who was rolling on the ground and crying in front of everyone, they knew that Li Yueming had held back when he fought with them. At least he gave them some face. This was 2F*ing awesome. It was simply unimaginable how terrifying and superb his martial arts techniques were. Looking at Li Yueming who was leisurely pacing on the martial arts stage, the 2 of them could not help but have such a feeling in their minds. Chapter 769, An Unprecedented Super Genius, _1. Looking at Li Yueming, who seemed to have entered a completely uninhabited place, all the teachers and students below the martial arts practice field were dumbfounded. One had to know that these were all level 1 martial artists who had activated their armed abilities. In front of Li Yueming, she was as weak as a child. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, no one would have imagined that such a thing could happen. Indeed, there were all kinds of strange things in the world. The remaining 7 noble children were much stronger than ordinary civilian martial artists. This should be a good foundation laid by long-term consumption of nutrient solutions, nutrient cream, and other supplements. It was also the greatest source of superiority for this group of noble children. As for actual combat experience, their performance was not even as good as the civilian martial artists. After all, the 2 commoner martial artists were also killed in an instant. However, there was still a corresponding countermeasure against Li Yueming's attack. Even if their so-called countermeasures were ineffective, it could be seen that they actually had a certain amount of combat experience. It was just that they were facing a typical hexagonal warrior and cheat player like Li Yueming. As for these 7 noble children, even if they used all their skills, they could not last 1 or 2 moves in front of Li Yueming. They were basically insta-killed. He couldn't even touch the corner of Li Yueming's clothes. A few minutes later, Li Yueming shook his head and said, "What a bunch of good-for-nothings. They fed the things they learned in school to the dogs." He said this without any emotion. However, it was precisely because of this attitude that made the group of noble children on the ground even more embarrassed. If Li Yueming dared to talk to them like this on any other day, they would probably be furious and think of ways to take revenge. But now, Li Yueming had single-handedly fought against the 7 of them and the 2 commoner children. The 9 of them were tied together and tried their best, but they could not get close to Li Yueming. This was already a great insult to them. Now, even if they were mocked by Li Yueming, they could only lower their heads and acquiesce. A0001 also stood out at the right time. Although the few of them had not been eliminated, they could not continue fighting with their rolling posture. No. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and 2 have lost their will to fight. They are automatically considered to have given up on the battle and eliminated. Number 1, name Li Yueming, obtained the final victory of this combat training. After the mechanical voice came, Li Yueming keenly felt that the white rune restriction that originally enveloped the martial arts stage had been removed. The sound of the wind and human voices from the outside world once again passed through the protective barrier. He looked around. Only then did Li Yueming realize that the teachers and students around him were all staring at him. It was as if Li Yueming was no longer a human, but the incarnation of a monster. Li Yueming could only smile bitterly. Ever since he chose to expose his strength and show off, he was already mentally prepared to be the center of attention. He could only hope that his actions would allow him to enter the attention of the higher UPS of the interstellar universe as a genius. Otherwise, he would really be looking for trouble for himself. Even though the actual combat training had already ended. However, the 7 noble children were still lying on the martial arts stage in a sorry state. Especially that high-ranking official's son named Yin Yi, the tears at the corner of his eyes were still wet. When he fought with him, Li Yueming had obviously given him a lot of information. Even among the 7 noble children, he was the most embarrassed one. The psychological shadow caused by him was even more unforgettable. He was afraid that from now on, he would have to walk around Li Yueming. Li Yueming ignored them and left the martial arts stage. Seeing him return to the queue unhurriedly, Bulletin Wea had a complicated expression. He originally only wanted to test if Li Yueming was hiding his strength. He didn't expect Li Yueming to prepare such a big surprise for him. This time, not only did the pressure not fall on Li Yueming, but it also added a huge psychological pressure to him. What was going on? Shooting oneself in the foot? Thinking of this, Bulletin Wea could not help but shake his head. A smile actually appeared on his ice-cold face. He walked to Li Yueming and nodded. This training, well done. A0001 will report the actual combat training video to the school leaders truthfully and strive to get you a special talent recommendation name. He was curious about how Li Yueming, a commoner, managed to do all this. However, he didn't really throw this question out. After all, everyone had their own secrets. What he wanted to do was to train talents for the front line, not to investigate why talents were talents, and there was no need to pry into other people's privacy. However, he did not have to ask how Li Yueming had obtained his martial arts skills and experience. However, he had to comment and respond to other students. Then the problem was, due to the protective shield blocking prying eyes, the various moves and techniques that Li Yueming used when he fought could only be observed with the naked eye. However, the problem was that even he could only understand a portion of it. Even he could not see through some of the extremely exquisite hands. How should he comment on this? He couldn't just say that he didn't see it clearly and ask Li Yueming to demonstrate it again, right? Chapter 770, An Unprecedented Super Genius, _2. The surrounding teachers and students had already gathered around, and pairs of passionate eyes were looking back and forth between him and Li Yueming. It was obvious that many people did not understand the battle just now. Now, they were waiting for him to review it. It was rare for Bulletin Wea to feel a heavy pressure in the academy, and the source of this pressure was actually from a student in his class. His professional career was facing an unprecedented challenge. As if he could feel the awkwardness, Li Yueming took the initiative to speak. A0001, review the battle just now. I think I made a few mistakes. Hearing Li Yueming's words, A0001 was silent for a moment before replying, request received. We are now starting to review. Soon, a projection of a virtual screen appeared in the sky above the training center. Li Yueming and the 9 level 1 martial artists appeared on the screen again. This was the recording of the previous battle, which recorded every move of both sides. It was simply too convenient to use it for analysis. When Li Yueming began to move, the A0001 artificial intelligence took the initiative to adjust the video to 0.5 times the speed. But even so, the group of people could only see a black shadow flash across the screen. Even if he was mentally prepared. When they saw this scene, the group of people couldn't help but feel their hearts skip a beat. It should be known that this was a scene that had been slowed down by twice, but it was still impossible to clearly capture Li Yueming's figure. How fast was this speed? No wonder the 2 commoner martial artists from before didn't even have time to react before they were sent out by Li Yueming. With such a fast speed, it would be difficult for any level 1 martial artist to keep up, right? A0001 slowed down again, especially when Li Yueming started to move. He played it frame by frame and said in a mechanical voice, detected that Li Yueming's initial movement speed is 32 meters per second, and his fastest speed is 46 meters per second. His physical fitness has reached the limit of a level 1 martial artist, and he has used extremely agile footwork. It is speculated that he is extremely sensitive to martial Dao movement techniques and body control. He is able to contract his muscles and unleash terrifying strength and speed in a short period of time. A0001's analysis speed was very slow. However, the logic behind his words was extremely clear. He actually managed to calculate Li Yueming's body's operating method and efficiency. It was a shocking amount of computing power. The rest of the people were focused on the 2 numerical units of 32 meters and 64 meters per second. They were not too surprised by the terrifying computing power displayed by A0001. Only Li Yueming was staring at A0001 in the air like a country bumpkin, and his eyes burst with a strange light. A0001 was only a universal artificial intelligence, but its computing power was already so terrifying. How ridiculous would the higher level A0002 and A0003 be? It seemed that there was no future in this world if one only walked the path of martial arts. It was only right to supplement it with technology. Previously, he had not figured out how to use the shiny gold talent of the machinery god. Now, he had a rough theoretical prototype in his mind. A0001 was still analyzing. The surrounding students were already deeply shocked. If they only looked at the battle just now. Without a doubt, it was a one-sided abuse of noobs. As the main character, Li Yueming didn't seem to have anything special except for his speed and strength. However, as A0001 reviewed and analyzed frame by frame, everyone finally understood the extremely complicated martial arts logic behind minimalism. This palm strike sent 2 students, Fu Hong and Su Yunfei, flying. It is estimated that the explosive strength of the body is not less than 1500 kg. The reason why he was able to break through the defense of the heart-protecting armor without causing any substantial damage to Hong and Su Yunfei is that Li Yueming used tremor punch from the third martial artist cultivation method. If defeating the enemy was the ultimate goal of a martial artist, then, what Li Yueming displayed in the process of beating the enemy was the most beautiful and ultimate art that martial artists pursued. It was simple and efficient, without any sloppiness. At the same time, the students and teachers below the martial arts stage were reviewing the game. In the meeting room deep inside the Starry Sky Martial Arts School, the vice principal had just finished talking about the recent work arrangements for Starry Sky. Just as Principal Martial Dragon was about to announce the end of the meeting, A0001's voice suddenly rang out, "Mr. Principal, Grade 12 Class 6's form teacher, Bulletin Wea, has sent you a video file." Martial Dragon frowned and asked, "What about the video's content and accompanying explanation?" A0001 replied, "He said that this is a video of the students' actual combat training on the stage in the comprehensive activity room 10 minutes ago." Martial Dragon was even more confused. A video of a few students' actual combat training, wasn't it just noobs pecking at each other? What was there to see? He was one of the few native level 6 martial artists on Planet 7 to 20,003. Although he was indeed the principal of the Starry Sky Martial Arts School, he was not actually in charge of the daily management of the school. He was only pulled over to be the enrollment mascot and the golden plaque. The 3 vice principals were in charge of the daily affairs of the school. Therefore, even if Bulletin Wea really had something to do, he should have gone to the vice principal. There was no reason for him to report directly to him. The vice principal noticed the change in his expression and could not help but ask, "Lord Martial Dragon, is there a problem?" Chapter 771, An Unprecedented Super Genius, _3. Martial Dragon shook his head and hesitated for a moment before saying, "A teacher from the school sent me a video file. Since everyone is present, I'll just open it and take a look." Because they were in a meeting. Almost all the higher UPS of the school were gathered in the meeting room. The principal, the vice principal, the dean, the grade director. It was all here. Martial Dragon had revealed this information in front of them because he didn't want to deal with the trouble alone. After all, most of his energy was focused on practicing martial arts. He only hoped to break through to level 7 martial artist in his lifetime and completely get rid of the planet's restrictions on people. He didn't want to waste his time on some troublesome matters. When they heard that someone had actually bypassed them to find the principal, the expressions on the 3 vice principals' faces were obviously a little uncomfortable. Someone asked directly, "Which teacher is it? You don't know the rules." Martial Dragon didn't directly say who it was. Instead, he let A0001 open the video file and glanced at it himself. After making sure that there wasn't any sensitive content, he said, "You guys take a look first. I don't know why he sent me such a video file." As he spoke, A0001 projected the video onto the large screen in the conference room. As a result, the recording screen on the martial arts stage appeared again. Looking at the young and immature posture of the students in the video, the senior leaders of the Starry Sky Martial School looked at each other. The dean frowned and said, "Isn't this the actual combat training video for students? Did the sender send the wrong file?" As the video slowly progressed, everyone saw something interesting. The main reason was that Bulletin Wea had actually allowed Li Yueming to go 1v9, successfully whetting the appetite of the school leaders. At the beginning, everyone looked relaxed. After all, although the teachers present were also supernatural beings, they were all civil servants. They might not know more about martial arts than Bo Wea. At least, they did not see any problems for the time being. Only Martial Dragon, who was a high-level martial artist, was keenly aware of some clues. His eyes revealed a shocking light as he said sternly, "Wait a minute, rewind the scene just now." Upon hearing his command, A0001 quickly froze the image and rewound it. This time, Martial Dragon wasn't as distracted as before. Instead, he sat up straight and focused on Li Yueming's every move when he dealt with the two commoner martial artists. After reading it 3 or 4 times, Martial Dragon finally let out a sigh of relief and asked in a muffled voice, "Who is this student?" A0001 searched for a moment and replied, "This student is grade 12 class 6 student, Li Yueming. His facial recognition accuracy is 100%. Ignoring the shocked gazes of the other leaders in the classroom, Martial Dragon stood up and ordered, "Get me all the information on this student immediately. Also, inform Bulletin Wea to bring that student to the meeting room to find me." After doing all this, Martial Dragon looked at the others present and slowly said, "Aren't you guys worried that the Starry Sky Martial Academy doesn't have enough geniuses to be nominated as special referees this year? There's a suitable candidate now." As he spoke, his voice paused, and his gaze suddenly became very sharp. "And this person? He was probably 10 times, or even 100 times more monstrous than any genius in the Starry Sky Martial Academy." Chapter 772, Terrifying Inference, Universe Grade Genius, _1. Martial Dragon's words stunned all the school leaders present. This young man in front of him, more monstrous than any genius in the Starry Sky Martial Academy by 100 times? Although he had fought against several students with his own strength, he was still able to win easily in the end. He could indeed be considered a genius that was rarely seen in decades. However, no matter how he looked at it, he was still a step away from becoming a true monster, right? He seemed to have sensed their doubts. Martial Dragon didn't hide anything. He asked A0001 to pause the video and continued, "Didn't you see? First of all, this student did not use the strength of a martial artist. He did not even use chi, in other words, the speed and strength that he had just unleashed did not rely on any martial arts power. It was all done by relying on his powerful physical fitness and perfect control of his body." Hearing this, as if waking up from a dream, the school leaders looked up. It was only then that he realized that it was indeed as Martial Dragon had said. Li Yueming's every move just now did not have any hint of martial arts fluctuations. He was fighting with exquisite techniques and consciousness. What did this mean? At the very least, it meant that Li Yueming's combat intuition was not ordinary. His understanding of martial arts was not something that ordinary people could compare to. To achieve this, one needed extremely high talent and hard work day after day, year after year. He also needed a pure heart of martial arts. Such a student was indeed beyond the scope of ordinary geniuses. Even in the entire star field, there were very few people who could do these things. The vice principal's voice trembled. After sizing up Li Yueming in the video, he said in disbelief, "So, did our school produce a star sector level genius? A star sector level genius? If it could grow successfully, it would be an existence that could have a profound impact on the planet. Let's not talk about anything else. At the very least, it would give Planet 7 to 20,003 more bargaining power in the entire star field and enjoy more benefits from the Alliance of Order. He would not be as secluded and unknown as he was now." Therefore, after knowing that Li Yueming might be a star sector level genius, he was shocked. The vice principal was so excited that he almost fainted. Unexpectedly, Martial Dragon shook his head and said, "If I remember correctly, there was a star sector level genius in the Starry Sky College more than 300 years ago, right? Although he had sacrificed himself at the front line before he could fully mature, but it still appeared." Hearing this, the group of school leaders present were stunned again. After a while, he understood Martial Dragon's meaning. The vice principal had completely doubted his life this time. He said with a somewhat uncertain tone, "So, Lord Longwu, your meaning is, this student's talent level was even higher than that star sector level genius." When Martial Dragon heard the vice principal's doubtful tone, his eyes immediately turned vertical. His voice became more serious as he repeated, "So my explanation wasn't clear enough? I'm saying that he's 10 times more monstrous than any genius in the Starry Sky College. How many times do I have to repeat myself?" Without a doubt. Martial Dragon's words were like a clap of thunder to the school leaders present. At this moment, they were so shocked that they were both tender. One had to know that the limit of what they could imagine was a star sector level genius. However, according to Martial Dragon's judgment, Li Yueming's talent was 10 times or 100 times more terrifying than that of a star sector level genius. Therefore, this young man in front of him who was still unknown for the time being, a universe-level genius? Was this really an existence that could be nurtured by a small planet like them? To be honest, all the school leaders, including the 3 vice principals who were in charge of the Starry Sky Martial Arts School, were doubting their lives. Compared to a universe-level genius, he can't be a real genius. They were more inclined to think that there was a mistake in the Dragon Marshal's judgment. After all, this result was too unbearable. Looking at the incredulous gazes of the school leaders, how could Martial Dragon not doubt life? However, after witnessing Li Yueming's various martial arts techniques and body control in battle, who could understand the shock in his heart? As a level 6 martial artist, he was a powerful martial artist. He believed that he had already reached a high level in the path of martial arts. But even so, even he couldn't fully understand some of the techniques that Li Yueming had just displayed. He could only understand part of the logic by analyzing it separately and repeatedly. In such a short period of time, he even had some doubts about his martial arts. One could imagine how much shock Li Yueming had given him. After coughing a few times, Martial Dragon weighed the pros and cons in his heart for a moment before speaking again. "It's not as exaggerated as you think. It shouldn't be a universe-level genius, but this student's talent shouldn't be something that ordinary star sector-level geniuses can compare to." Hearing this explanation, only then did the suspicion in the school leader's eyes lessen a little. Fortunately, he was only a star domain-level genius. My ass! It was already terrifying enough for a player to have talent that was even more terrifying than the average star sector-level genius. After picking up such a precious piece of trash, as long as the Starry Sky Martial Academy sent him to the stage where he should go, it might even become a school that was slightly famous in the entire star field in a few hundred years. At the thought of this, a ball of fire burned in the hearts of all the school leaders. They wished they could immediately run over to verify the authenticity of the matter. Chapter 773, Terrifying Inference, Universe Grade Genius, _2. She finally suppressed the thought of not being too elegant. After all, Martial Dragon had already asked A0001 to inform Bulletin Wea and Li Yueming. If everything went as planned, the two of them should be on their way to the office by now. What they needed to do now was to calm down. He couldn't let other schools get too much information about this. Otherwise, he would be shooting himself in the foot if he came to poach her. He pondered. The few of them looked up at the virtual screen again. Previously, because they didn't quite understand why Bulletin Wea had suddenly sent such a video, the Starry Sky Martial School's higher UPS and Martial Dragon himself hadn't paid much attention to the content of the video. Now that they realized the significance of this video, the group of people focused on observing. The video, which was less than 10 minutes long, had been flipped over and over several times. The more he looked, the more shocked he became. On the other side, Li Yueming and Bulletin Wea had already received a message from the school leader. He was indeed on his way to the meeting room. Bulletin Wea hadn't said anything before. After all, there were too many students present at that time, and some things were not suitable to be made public in front of so many people. Now that there was no one around, it was more suitable. He glanced at Li Yueming and asked, "How did you comprehend it? Such a peak martial art technique, it's simply... This is unbelievable." Li Yueming had already guessed that he would ask this question. However, this was not a taboo topic. Therefore, he naturally replied, "I've comprehended it from the third martial artist cultivation plan. If I have to say what's special about it, it's probably because I like to think more. I'll always deduce some battle scenes in my mind." He said it very casually. However, Buletin didn't sound so relaxed. The third set of martial artist cultivation plan was as deep as the sea. This was publicly acknowledged in the martial artist world. The general principles of this plan were finalized by the current world god of the martial arts side of the third universe. The branches of martial arts were supplemented by supreme martial artists. If such a comprehensive martial arts cultivation plan was really as simple as it seemed on the surface, it would be too challenging for one's intelligence. The problem was that this plan was easy to learn. Anyone could learn a little. However, it was even more difficult to truly learn. How many martial artists could comprehend 1% of the details in their lifetime? It was already enough to make a name for themselves. Those who could truly understand this plan were not yet born, but at least they were not existences that ordinary martial artists could come into contact with. And now, Li Yueming was able to understand this plan in such detail just by thinking and deducing. There was no doubt that it was a very terrifying talent. Bowie had taught for so many years and had seen many geniuses. However, someone like Li Yueming, who could comprehend martial arts so thoroughly at the age of 17 or 18, was really unheard of and unheard of. He wondered how many freaks with such talent could exist on the top 10 planets of the central star field of the Alliance of Order. "I'm afraid there aren't many of them." Buletin didn't know, but it didn't affect him at all. The Starry Sky College was neither small nor big. Under the guidance of A0001, the two of them took the campus express train and arrived at the office building in 20 minutes. As they got closer and closer to the meeting room, Buletin finally came back to his senses. He turned to look at Li Yueming, who was standing beside him with an indifferent expression. Buletin said with a rare look of seriousness, "Remember, after you go to the star domain, try not to go to the front lines as much as possible. Even if you really want to go, you must be very careful. The Zergs are very scary. They can keenly sense the difference in energy levels between geniuses and ordinary people. There are even Zergs called hunters who are responsible for hunting down the elites of the Alliance of Order who have yet to mature. The Starry Sky College had a super genius more than 300 years ago. In the end, because of his arrogance, he revealed his whereabouts on the front-line battlefield and was eventually intercepted and killed by the insect hunter team. Obviously, Buletin had also noticed the talent that Li Yueming had displayed. In order to prevent Li Yueming from getting carried away by the various flowers that he might face next and becoming conceited and arrogant, he deliberately told Li Yueming about the miserable outcome of the super genius more than 300 years ago. Good medicine is bitter to the mouth, but good advice is unpleasant to the ear. There was no doubt that as a teacher, Buletin lived up to his status. "Don't worry, I'll take this as a warning." Li Yueming nodded solemnly. Li Yueming's attitude towards this world and the ultimate test of the reincarnation mark was extremely cautious. The reason why he revealed a part of his talent was because he had made a decision after careful consideration. After all, this world was different from the previous worlds. Because of the Zergs, the external enemy, the Alliance of Order was generally considered united. They were very tolerant of geniuses. As long as they showed enough talent, the Alliance of Order would shield them from most of the open and hidden attacks on their growth path. Moreover, practicing martial arts also required a huge investment of resources. Other than joining the Alliance of Law and Order, there was no other way to obtain a large amount of resources. After considering everything. Chapter 774, Terrifying Inference, Universe Grade Genius, _3. Li Yueming naturally wouldn't be stupid enough to work alone. Of course, everything came with a price. Just like what he had said when he first entered this world, everything was to stop the Zergs from invading the central universe. As long as they were united on this point, other problems could be put aside. The danger of being an enemy of the insect race could be imagined. As they chatted, Li Yueming suddenly thought of something. After hesitating for a moment, he finally said, "Teacher Bulletin, I want to ask you for a favor." "What is it?" Bulletin Wea was surprised. "What is it?" "If I get into the military college, I'm afraid I won't be able to stay on this planet for too long. I hope you can help me take care of my uncle, aunt, and cousin." As Li Yueming spoke, he paused for a moment and sorted out his thoughts before continuing. "Not long after my parents gave birth to me, they went to the battlefield, so I've troubled uncle and aunt a lot since I was young. If I go to the depths of the starry sky, I probably won't be able to be filial to them in the future. Moreover, I don't have anyone I can trust here. After thinking about it, only you are worthy of my trust." Hearing Li Yueming's words, Bulletin Wea was a little surprised. After a moment, he burst out laughing. "I wonder if you think too highly of me or look down on yourself. With the talent you've shown now, how can I take care of your family? The entire 7 to 20,003 planet will have a lot of people in power who will fight to give you the best resources." Of course, Li Yueming knew that what he said was the truth. But because it was the truth, he needed more protection and defense, right? Therefore, he ignored Bulletin Wea's teasing and continued to look at the man in front of him with a serious expression. Only then did Bulletin Wea realize that Li Yueming wasn't joking. He really wanted him to take care of his family. Therefore, he put on a stiff face and said solemnly, "Although I don't think I can provide much help, since you took the initiative to mention it to me, I can naturally agree. However, I have a condition that you have to agree to." "What?" Li Yueming was puzzled. Bulletin Wea was lost in thought. After a while, he replied, "I was born on a remote planet that had already been conquered by the Zerg. I was lucky enough to be saved by a passing interstellar army. I've spent most of my life shuttling between the various battlefields on the front lines. It wasn't until I was injured and retired to the Starry Sky Martial Academy to become a teacher that I truly found the meaning of life. I was determined to shine with my limited talent and make the greatest contribution to the central universe. If nothing unexpected happens, you should be the highest peak that I can reach in my teaching career. Before the Zergs are completely repelled and destroyed, remember to cherish your life. Don't die." Li Yueming also nodded solemnly. The guy who was called the cold-faced instructor in front of him didn't seem to be as cold as he remembered. It was just that he was used to the simple and efficient way of doing things and was not so good at expressing his feelings. As they conversed, the advanced conference room in the deepest part of the Starry Sky College's office building was already in front of them. Li Yueming and Bulletin Wea also restrained their excess emotions and tidied up their appearance. The two of them stood at the door. After A0001 mechanically detected their faces, it quickly said, "Student Li Yueming, Teacher Bulletin Wea, the principal and vice principal have been waiting for you for a long time. Please go in." Chapter 775, 10 Million Scholarship. As a smart assistant, A0001 was spread throughout the Galactic Society. After receiving its feedback, Bulletin Wea walked in front and knocked on the door of the meeting room. After a moment of silence, Martial Dragon's voice rang out in the meeting room, "Please come in." Bulletin Wea pushed open the door, and Li Yueming followed him into the meeting room. Bulletin Wea was stunned when he saw the scene in the meeting room. He had not expected so many high-level leaders of the Starry Sky Martial School to be sitting neatly in this unassuming meeting room. The moment he entered the meeting room, Li Yueming immediately felt a pair of scorching eyes looking at him. The most enthusiastic ones were the three vice principals on the left. After all, they were the actual managers and benefactors of the Starry Sky College. Martial Dragon was only in name. The Starry Sky College's appearance of a suspected star sector level genius like Li Yueming was also the most beneficial for them. Therefore, The three vice principals looked at Li Yueming passionately. Next was the principal, Martial Dragon, who was sitting at the head of the table. As a pure martial artist who was obsessed with martial arts, Martial Dragon was naturally very interested in a super genius like Li Yueming. A group of school leaders stared at Li Yueming and sized him up. A moment later, Wu Yu, the vice principal who was sitting next to Martial Dragon and actually managing the Starry Sky Martial Academy, asked, "You're a student from grade 12 class 6. Your name is Li Yueming, right?" Li Yueming nodded and said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "May I ask why the principal called me here?" Vice Principal Wu stroked his beard. His eyes were very sharp. He didn't say anything and just gestured to A0001 beside him. Immediately, the big screen showed the video of Li Yueming's 1v9 on the martial arts stage. In the picture, Li Yueming was strolling leisurely in the courtyard, easily knocking down a group of students who usually boasted of being from noble families. No one could even touch the corner of his clothes. Looking at the video behind him and then at Li Yueming, Vice Principal Wu slowly opened his mouth to confirm, "Do you know what the talent you showed just now means?" As a reincarnator, Li Yueming knew what his talent meant. There would be a difference between individual power and world level. However, there was no difference in terms of combat skills and experience. Although Li Yueming was only a level 1 martial artist, he had countless battle experiences that he had honed on the edge of life and death. In addition, he had analyzed many martial arts techniques in the third practice plan for personal mighty power martial artists during this period of time. Even if he had only displayed 1/10 of his experience and skills, he could be considered a peerless genius at this age. But now was not the time to be so honest. Therefore, he shook his head and said, "I don't know. Please tell me, Principal." Wu Yu's voice was a little shaky. It was obvious that he was trying very hard to control his emotions, but he still lost his composure and said, "This means that you are likely to be listed as a key training target by the military committee. Among the special referees of Planet 7 to 20,003 this year, there will be a name for you." Li Yueming's heart was as clear as a mirror, but he still had to put on an act. He hurriedly revealed a dazed expression and said, "This? Really?" Wu Yu didn't even have time to speak. Martial Dragon took over the conversation and said, "If the martial arts skills you showed during the actual combat training are real, I can even find a way to send you to the Imperial Sun Star and enter the best martial arts academy of the Alliance of Law in the Imperial Sun Star field to cultivate." Li Yueming appeared a little fearful and quickly said, "Thank you for taking care of me, Principal. However, my martial arts skills are very clumsy. I'm afraid I can't go up to such a big stage." After a few questions, the group of school leaders had a good impression of Li Yueming. After all, they had already obtained Li Yueming's personal information. According to the information, Li Ming did not have a family background and was very clean. He was a normal commoner genius. To them, it was definitely a huge potential stock worth investing in. At this moment, only the homeroom teacher, Bulletin Huia, had a strange expression on his face. After all, the current Li Yueming was completely different from the Li Yueming he knew. This harmless attitude seemed to have dug a pit for the school leaders, waiting for them to line up and jump into it. Bo Huia opened his mouth, wanting to say something. However, thinking about it carefully, there seemed to be nothing wrong with this. After all, one was willing to fight while the other was willing to suffer. Li Yueming needed the school's investment, and the school also needed Li Yueming to make some achievements to increase his voice. There was simply no more suitable partner than this. About 2 hours later, Li Yueming finally walked out of the meeting room. The risk this time was clearly worth it. Vice Principal Wu had agreed to apply for a personal special fund of 10 million universe credits for him to subsidize his martial arts training and other needs. Moreover, this money was not a one-time payment. As long as Li Yueming still had this need, the school would transfer 10 million yuan to his card every year. The money was given by the school. Next, as long as Li Yueming could successfully pass the military academy's assessment and be selected as a special referrer. The 7 to 20,003 Planet Security Committee would also give him an additional highest-level Planet Talent Training Program special fund.